Post-Impressionism, exploring the divergence from Impressionism, written by Haya Vent, narrated by Kara Miller. Chapter 1, Introduction to Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism is an art movement that emerged in France in the late 19th century, evolving directly from the innovations of the Impressionists, but diverging significantly in both style and philosophy. While the Impressionists focused on capturing the fleeting effects of light and color in the natural world, Post-Impressionists sought to push the boundaries of art further, exploring deeper emotional expression, symbolic meaning, and new approaches to structure and form. This chapter introduces the movement, highlighting its key features, influences, and the artists who played central roles in its development. The roots of Post-Impressionism lie in the revolution brought about by the Impressionist movement. The Impressionists, such as Claude Monet and Pierre-Auguste Renoir, broke away from traditional academic painting by focusing on everyday scenes and the transient quality of natural light. However, while the Impressionists were concerned with the external world, Post-Impressionist artists began to look inward, using art as a tool for personal expression. They were less concerned with capturing the exact moment or the accuracy of color, as the Impressionists had been. Instead, they sought to represent emotion, the subconscious, and the subjective experience. At its core, Post-Impressionism is characterized by a more expressive use of color, shape, and form. The artists of this movement began experimenting with color theories, often using vibrant hues to convey mood and emotion rather than simply reproducing the natural world. They also experimented with brushwork, texture, and abstraction, rejecting the notion that art should only represent reality in a realistic manner. Where Impressionism blurred boundaries and captured light, Post-Impressionism sought to structure and control it in new ways, emphasizing the artist's personal vision and inner world. Post-Impressionism is not a unified style, but rather a collection of approaches that represent individual responses to the limitations of Impressionism. The movement includes a range of techniques and philosophies, with some artists, like Paul Cézanne, focusing on the geometry and structure of objects, while others, like Vincent van Gogh, emphasized emotional intensity and dynamic brushwork. Others, such as Georges Seurat, developed scientific methods of color application, notably through pointillism. The diversity within Post-Impressionism reflects the broader trends of experimentation that were unfolding in art, setting the stage for many of the modernist movements that followed in the 20th century. By breaking away from the constraints of realism and offering new ways to approach subjectivity and form, Post-Impressionism redefined the role of the artist in society and its place in cultural history. The legacy of Impressionism. The legacy of Impressionism is foundational to the development of modern art, and its influence stretches far beyond the late 19th century. As a revolutionary movement, Impressionism broke with centuries of tradition, changing the way artists perceived and represented the world around them. Its impact paved the way for subsequent art movements, including Post-Impressionism, and reshaped the future of artistic expression. This legacy is seen in its radical departure from established conventions of form, color, and subject matter, as well as its challenge to the role of the artist in society. Impressionism was characterized by its focus on capturing the transient effects of light and color. By painting on plein air or outdoors, Impressionist artists sought to record the fleeting moments of everyday life. This marked a departure from the rigid, studio-bound academic painting that dominated the art world at the time. Artists like Claude Monet, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and Edgar Degas embraced unconventional techniques, using loose, rapid brushstrokes and a lighter color palette to convey the essence of a scene rather than focusing on its precise details. This approach freed art from the constraints of realism and opened up new possibilities for how to depict the world. The Impressionist movement also rejected traditional subject matter, embracing ordinary scenes from modern life, street scenes, landscapes, and leisure activities, rather than historical or mythological themes. This democratic shift in subject matter brought the art world closer to everyday life, helping to elevate the mundane to the level of high art. The movement also brought the idea that an artist's personal vision and subjective experience could be as valid as objective reality. This was a radical shift, considering the prior emphasis on technical skill and representation in art. Impressionism's emphasis on innovation and personal expression set the stage for the Post-Impressionist movement as artists sought to push the boundaries of what art could achieve. Figures like Paul Cézanne, Vincent van Gogh, and Georges Seurat built upon the achievements of the Impressionists, but expanded on them with their own unique approaches. While the Impressionists focused on light and atmosphere, Post-Impressionists delved into the use of color, structure, and symbolism to convey deeper emotional and intellectual themes. The legacy of Impressionism's exploration of color, light, and modernity would continue to reverberate throughout the 20th century, influencing movements such as Fauvism, Expressionism, and Cubism. In sum, the legacy of Impressionism is profound. Its break from tradition, its embrace of modern life, and its exploration of light, color, and subjective experience reshaped the art world and paved the way for future experimentation. The freedom and innovation that Impressionism introduced remain essential to the language of contemporary art. Defining Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism is a term used to describe a diverse group of artists and artistic approaches that emerged as a reaction to the limitations of Impressionism in the late 19th century. While Impressionism focused on capturing the fleeting effects of light, color, and atmosphere in everyday scenes, Post-Impressionism sought to push the boundaries of artistic expression, moving beyond the emphasis on immediate visual perception to explore deeper emotional, psychological, and symbolic meanings. The movement is not a unified style, but rather a collection of individual artistic responses to the principles established by the Impressionists, characterized by varied techniques, subjects, and ideologies. One of the key features of Post-Impressionism is its rejection of the Impressionists' focus on capturing the momentary aspects of light and nature. Artists in this movement were less concerned with the transient qualities of the natural world and more interested in creating art that conveyed personal expression, emotion, and structure. For instance, Paul Cézanne, often considered the father of modern art, sought to impose a sense of order and structure onto the landscape, emphasizing geometric shapes and the underlying forms of nature. His approach to color and perspective would later influence the development of Cubism. In contrast, Vincent van Gogh's work was driven by emotional intensity and the expression of inner turmoil. His bold use of color and dramatic brushwork communicated powerful emotions, often reflecting his personal struggles with mental health. Van Gogh's approach moved far beyond the mere depiction of reality, as his paintings conveyed his internal experiences and interpretations of the world around him. This emotional depth became one of the defining aspects of Post-Impressionism. Another prominent figure in Post-Impressionism, Georges Seurat, took a more scientific approach to color. Seurat developed pointillism, a technique that involved applying small distinct dots of color to create optical effects. His work emphasized the theory of color mixing and sought to bring precision and order to the expressive freedom seen in Impressionism. In doing so, he created a visual language that was both systematic and deeply innovative. Ultimately, Post-Impressionism was not about a single set of principles or techniques, but about artists seeking to explore new ways of representing their subjective experiences. Whether through the abstraction of form, the emotional use of color, or the incorporation of symbolism, Post-Impressionists expanded the possibilities of what art could achieve. Their work marked a decisive break from the past and laid the groundwork for the modern art movements of the 20th century. Key characteristics of Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism, while stemming from the innovations of the Impressionist movement, is distinct in its emphasis on personal expression, emotional depth, and a departure from mere visual accuracy. The movement encompasses a wide range of styles and approaches, but certain key characteristics unify the work of its artists. These features include the use of vibrant color, a focus on structure and form, an exploration of symbolic and emotional content, and a push toward abstraction, all of which contributed to the radical transformation of art at the turn of the century. One of the most defining characteristics of Post-Impressionism is the bold and expressive use of color. While Impressionists focused on capturing the light and natural colors of a scene, Post-Impressionists sought to manipulate color for emotional or symbolic effect. Artists like Vincent van Gogh used color to express inner turmoil and psychological states, choosing intense, non-naturalistic hues to reflect emotion rather than natural observation. Similarly, Paul Gauguin's use of vivid colors in his Tahitian works conveyed symbolic meaning and a sense of otherworldliness, further separating his approach from the Impressionist goal of representing reality. Another key characteristic is the Post-Impressionists' departure from the Impressionist preoccupation with light and atmospheric effects. Artists in this movement turned their attention to structure, form, and the underlying geometry of the subject. Paul Cézanne, for instance, used simple shapes and distorted perspectives to create a sense of order and permanence in his landscapes and still lifes. His focus on the geometric underpinnings of nature, such as his repeated depiction of a mountain or a group of apples, laid the groundwork for future abstract art and cubism. Post-Impressionism is also marked by a move towards abstraction. While Impressionism captured the essence of a moment, Post-Impressionists began to explore ways of representing more subjective and emotional realities. This shift is evident in the work of artists like Georges Seurat, who employed the technique of pointillism to explore optical color mixing, and in Van Gogh's expressive brushstrokes that conveyed his emotional engagement with the subject. Seurat's precise, systematic approach contrasted sharply with Van Gogh's emotional intensity, yet both artists were united in their desire to move beyond mere visual representation. Finally, Post-Impressionism is characterized by a greater emphasis on symbolism and personal meaning. Artists sought to convey their individual psychological states, dreams, and internal experiences through their work, often incorporating symbolic imagery to express deeper layers of meaning. The movement rejected the notion that art should be limited to realistic depictions of the visible world, and instead, Post-Impressionists used their art to explore themes of spirituality, psychological complexity, and the imagination. Together, these characteristics define Post-Impressionism as a dynamic and diverse movement that shifted the course of modern art, laying the groundwork for the developments of early 20th century avant-garde movements. Overview of leading Post-Impressionist artists. The Post-Impressionist movement, though diverse in style and approach, was defined by a group of artists who each brought unique perspectives and techniques to the evolving art world. While these artists shared an interest in moving beyond the constraints of Impressionism, their individual contributions varied significantly, ranging from emotional expressionism to the exploration of geometric form and symbolism. Among the most influential of these figures were Paul Cézanne, Vincent van Gogh, Georges Seurat, and Paul Gauguin, each of whom helped shape the trajectory of modern art. Paul Cézanne is often considered the bridge between Impressionism and the more abstract movements of the 20th century. His focus on structure, form, and the underlying geometry of nature distinguished him from his contemporaries. Cézanne's revolutionary approach to perspective, as seen in his landscapes and still lifes, emphasized the solidity and permanence of the natural world, even as he abstracted and simplified it into geometric shapes. His work, such as the iconic Mont Sainte-Victoire series, laid the groundwork for the development of Cubism and had a profound influence on future artists, including Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. Vincent van Gogh, on the other hand, was deeply invested in the emotional power of color and brushwork. His turbulent life and struggles with mental health informed much of his art, and his bold, expressive use of vibrant colors and dynamic brushstrokes became one of the defining aspects of Post-Impressionism. Works like Starry Night and Sunflowers reflect his inner turmoil, while also capturing a sense of deep emotional connection to the world. Van Gogh's approach to color and texture would later inspire Expressionism and Abstract Expressionism, influencing generations of artists who sought to convey emotional depth through their work. Georges Seurat introduced a more scientific approach to Post-Impressionism with his development of pointillism. By applying small dots of color in a precise, methodical manner, Seurat explored the relationship between color and light, and the way the eye perceives color when viewed from a distance. His masterpiece, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, is a prime example of his technique, creating optical effects through the careful placement of color. Seurat's methodical approach to painting was a marked departure from the spontaneous, expressive brushwork of other Post-Impressionists, yet his work had a lasting influence on modern art. Paul Gauguin, another pivotal figure in Post-Impressionism, rejected both the conventions of European painting and the industrialized society of the time. His work is characterized by vibrant colors, symbolic imagery, and a desire to return to a more primitive and untainted world. Gauguin's time in Tahiti was particularly influential, as it allowed him to explore themes of spirituality, innocence, and the exotic in ways that defied Western artistic traditions. Paintings like Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? Reflect his complex engagement with symbolism and the search for meaning in art. Together, these artists, Cézanne, Van Gogh, Seurat, and Gauguin, each advanced the Post-Impressionist movement in distinct ways, setting the stage for the diverse and experimental art that would follow in the 20th century. Their exploration of new techniques, emotional depth, and symbolic content helped to redefine the possibilities of painting and left an indelible mark on the course of modern art. The transition from Impressionism to Post-Impressionism. The transition from Impressionism to Post-Impressionism was not a sudden break, but rather a gradual shift in both artistic philosophy and practice that took place over several decades. While Impressionism, which flourished in the 1870s and 1880s, sought to capture the fleeting effects of light, color, and atmosphere in natural scenes, Post-Impressionism represented a departure from this focus on immediate perception. Post-Impressionist artists moved beyond the goals of the Impressionists, exploring more personal, emotional, and symbolic aspects of their subjects. This shift reflected a broader change in the cultural and intellectual climate of the time, as artists increasingly sought to reflect the complexities of modern life and the inner workings of the mind. Impressionism itself marked a dramatic departure from the rigid, classical traditions of academic painting, and in many ways, it laid the foundation for the changes that followed. The Impressionists' emphasis on capturing natural light, spontaneous brushwork, and the everyday lives of modern people set a new standard for artistic freedom. However, over time, many of these artists began to feel constrained by the limitations of their approach. The Impressionists' focus on color and light, while revolutionary, did not provide the means to explore deeper emotional or intellectual concerns. Some artists felt the need to move away from the Impressionists' emphasis on the external world and experiment with more personal and subjective representations. This search for greater expression and meaning is one of the key reasons for the emergence of Post-Impressionism. Artists like Paul Cézanne, Vincent van Gogh, Georges Seurat, and Paul Gauguin were all directly influenced by the innovations of the Impressionists, but sought to expand upon them. Cézanne, for instance, while building on the Impressionist use of color, began to focus on structure and form, using color to define and solidify the composition of his landscapes and still lifes. Van Gogh's bold, emotional use of color and brushstroke represented a break from the Impressionist ideal of objective reality, embracing instead a more introspective, personal interpretation of the world. The advent of pointillism, developed by Seurat, also represented a shift away from the free-flowing brushwork of the Impressionists. Seurat's careful, methodical application of tiny dots of color was a direct challenge to the spontaneity that characterized much of Impressionism. Likewise, Gauguin's move away from realism and his embrace of symbolism and the exotic reflected a desire to explore deeper, often mystical themes in his work. The transition from Impressionism to Post-Impressionism was, therefore, a natural progression as artists sought to push the boundaries of what was possible within the framework of Impressionist ideals. The Post-Impressionists expanded on the Impressionist emphasis on color and light, but did so in ways that allowed for greater emotional depth, structural innovation, and symbolic expression. This shift laid the groundwork for the modernist movements of the early 20th century, including Cubism, Fauvism, and Expressionism, which would further break from traditional forms of representation. Chapter 2: Historical Context and Influences. The emergence of Post-Impressionism in the late 19th century was deeply influenced by the historical, social, and intellectual climate of the time, as the world transitioned from the rigid structures of the 19th century to the dynamic changes of the modern era. Artists sought new ways to express the complexities of the rapidly evolving society. Political upheaval, technological innovation, and the shift toward industrialization all played significant roles in shaping the artistic responses of post-impressionist painters, who aimed to break free from traditional conventions and explore fresh ways of representing reality. In France, where post-impressionism was born, the late 19th century was marked by a period of political instability and change. The French Revolution of 1789 and the subsequent rise of industrial capitalism had already transformed French society, and by the time Post-Impressionism emerged, the country was witnessing the rise of the Third Republic and dealing with the aftermath of the Franco-Prussian War. This period of uncertainty, along with the rapid growth of cities and the rise of the middle class, prompted a reevaluation of societal values. The rapid urbanization of Paris, in particular, became a central theme in the art of the period, as artists sought to depict the vibrancy and alienation of modern life. The bustling streets, cafes, and leisure activities of the city were captured by both the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, though the latter often infused these scenes with deeper emotional or symbolic meaning. At the same time, advances in technology, especially in photography and the development of new pigments, had a profound effect on the visual arts. Photography, in particular, challenged the traditional role of painting as a means of documenting reality. With the camera now able to capture moments with great precision, artists turned their attention to exploring different aspects of reality, such as emotion, perception, and abstraction. This sense of liberation from the constraints of realism gave rise to the experimental approaches seen in Post-Impressionism. Intellectually, the period was marked by the influence of new scientific and philosophical ideas. Theories of color and perception, such as those developed by chemist Michel-Eugène Chevreul, provided post-impressionist artists like Georges Seurat with the tools to experiment with color theory and optical effects. Additionally, the growing interest in psychology, particularly in the works of Sigmund Freud, encouraged artists to delve into the unconscious mind, leading to more expressive and symbolic representations in their work. The symbolist movement, which emphasized the subjective and emotional experience over objective reality, also played a significant role in influencing post-impressionist artists like Paul Gauguin. Thus, the historical context of Post-Impressionism was shaped by a confluence of social, political, technological, and intellectual developments. These influences not only altered the way artists viewed the world, but also spurred them to explore new ways of expressing the complexities of modern life. The result was a movement that sought to move beyond the visible world, embracing subjective experience, emotion, and abstraction to capture the essence of the human condition. Social and political climate in late 19th century France. The late 19th century in France was a period of profound social and political change, marked by significant upheaval and transformation that directly influenced the course of art. This era was shaped by the aftermath of the French Revolution, the rise of industrialization, the growth of cities, and the formation of a new political landscape. These changes created an atmosphere of both optimism and uncertainty, which can be seen reflected in the works of post-impressionist artists who were deeply engaged with the modern world and its challenges. Politically, the late 19th century in France was dominated by the transition between monarchies and republics, which followed the tumultuous events of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era. The rise of the Third Republic in 1870, after the defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, marked the beginning of a more stable political system, but also one that faced internal struggles. France was grappling with the aftermath of the war, the loss of Alsace-Lorraine, and the suppression of the Paris Commune, an uprising in 1871 that had sought to create a socialist government. The political climate was polarized, with tensions between monarchists, republicans, and socialists, as well as growing support for various radical political movements. These divisions influenced the artistic community, as many artists began to express dissatisfaction with the status quo, seeking alternative ways of representing the social and political realities of their time. Socially, this period was defined by rapid industrialization and urbanization. The rise of the factory system and the growth of Paris as a major industrial and cultural center brought profound changes to everyday life. While the middle class expanded, so did the disparities between rich and poor, and the challenges of industrial labor and overcrowded living conditions became pressing issues. Artists responded to these shifts by turning their attention to modern life, including the vibrant energy of Parisian cafes, the leisure activities of the bourgeoisie, and the alienation that accompanied the city's urban expansion. The Post-Impressionists, however, sought to transcend mere social realism by focusing on the emotional and psychological dimensions of modern existence, reflecting the turbulence of the period in their work. Culturally, the late 19th century was a time of intellectual and philosophical growth, with new ideas about society, psychology, and perception influencing artists. The rise of scientific discoveries, such as the theory of evolution and new studies in psychology, challenged traditional ways of thinking about humanity and the natural world. The Impressionists had already broken with academic tradition, but the Post-Impressionists sought to push even further, delving into abstraction, emotional expression, and symbolism to convey their own unique views of the world. Thus, the social and political climate of late 19th century France created a backdrop of tension, experimentation, and transformation that profoundly impacted the development of art. Post-Impressionist artists, responding to these changes, explored new ways to express both the external world and their inner lives, helping to lay the groundwork for the modernist movements that would follow. Technological and scientific advances. The late 19th century was a period of remarkable technological and scientific advancements that had a significant impact on art and culture. Innovations in various fields, including photography, color theory, and psychology, helped shape the way artists approached their work and the ways in which they explored perception, representation, and the human experience. These advancements, along with the broader context of industrialization and modernization, contributed to the evolution of Post-Impressionism, a movement that sought to go beyond the observational realism of Impressionism by exploring deeper emotional, psychological, and abstract concepts. One of the most important technological developments was the invention and widespread use of photography. Introduced in the 1830s and perfected throughout the century, photography challenged traditional painting by providing an accurate and instantaneous means of recording visual information. As photographers were able to capture reality in a way that painting had once been tasked with doing, artists began to question the role of painting as a means of representation. This shift led many artists, including the Post-Impressionists, to focus less on the mere depiction of the visible world and more on personal expression, emotional resonance, and the underlying structures of reality. Artists like Paul Cézanne and Georges Seurat, for example, moved away from the illusion of photographic realism and began to experiment with abstraction and color theory, seeking to convey a deeper, more subjective understanding of the world. Scientific advancements in the study of color also played a crucial role in shaping post-impressionist techniques. The work of chemists such as Michel-Eugène Chevreul, who developed theories on the optical effects of complementary colors, influenced artists like Georges Seurat and Vincent van Gogh. Chevreul's research revealed how colors could interact and intensify each other when placed side by side, which led to the development of pointillism, a technique that Seurat famously employed in his work. By applying small dots of pure color, Seurat was able to create optical effects, allowing the viewer's eye to blend the colors at a distance, resulting in a vibrant and dynamic composition. Moreover, the rise of psychology and new theories of perception influenced the ways in which artists approach their subjects. The growing interest in the unconscious mind and human emotion, particularly through the works of figures like Sigmund Freud, inspired artists to explore inner states and subjective experience. This is evident in the emotionally charged works of Vincent van Gogh, whose swirling, intense brushstrokes and color choices convey a psychological depth that went beyond mere representation of the physical world. In sum, the technological and scientific advancements of the late 19th century were pivotal in shaping the development of post-impressionism. Photography, color theory, and psychological studies all played a role in pushing artists to explore new ways of seeing and representing the world, resulting in a movement that sought to capture not just what was visible, but what was felt, perceived, and imagined. These innovations helped artists move toward abstraction, symbolism, and emotional expression, and laid the groundwork for the modernist movements of the 20th century. The rise of new art movements. The late 19th century saw a dramatic shift in the world of art, with the rise of new movements that broke away from the traditional academic conventions of the past. As industrialization, political upheaval, and scientific discoveries transformed society, artists began to question the established norms and sought new ways to reflect the rapidly changing world. These shifts laid the foundation for the development of post-impressionism, as well as the broader modern art movements that followed, such as Fauvism, Cubism, and Expressionism. The rise of these new movements was in part a reaction against the rigid academic standards of the past and the constraints of realism, as artists sought to explore more personal, emotional, and abstract expressions of reality. One of the most significant movements that influenced post-impressionism was Impressionism itself. Emerging in the 1870s, Impressionism rejected the traditional rules of academic painting, embracing spontaneous brushwork and a focus on light and color. Artists like Claude Monet, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and Edgar Degas sought to capture the fleeting effects of nature and everyday life, focusing on scenes of modern life rather than the historical or mythological subjects favored by previous generations. While the Impressionists were initially criticized for their loose brushstrokes and unorthodox techniques, their emphasis on capturing the essence of the moment marked a break from centuries of academic tradition. This shift in approach opened the door for post-impressionists to further experiment with style and subject matter, as they moved away from mere observation toward personal expression and abstraction. By the time post-impressionism emerged in the 1880s, artists were already seeking to push beyond the Impressionist focus on light and atmosphere. Artists like Paul Cézanne, Vincent van Gogh, and Georges Seurat began to explore new techniques and ways of seeing the world, each reacting to the limitations they saw in the work of their predecessors. Seurat, for example, developed pointillism, a technique based on the scientific principles of color theory, while Van Gogh turned to bold, expressive brushstrokes and vibrant color to convey emotion. These artists were not merely concerned with reproducing what they saw, but with translating their inner experiences and perceptions onto the canvas. Simultaneously, the symbolist movement, which had emerged in the 1880s as a reaction to realism, was also influencing the Post-Impressionists. Symbolism emphasized the subjective, emotional, and spiritual aspects of art, often using dreamlike and mystical imagery to evoke feelings rather than describe reality. Paul Gauguin, with his exploration of primitivism and spiritual themes, was deeply influenced by symbolism, as seen in his work during his time in Tahiti. This move toward symbolism and emotional depth further distanced Post-Impressionism from the observational approach of Impressionism. Thus, the rise of new art movements in the late 19th century, including Impressionism, symbolism, and the exploration of abstraction, directly influenced the development of Post-Impressionism. Artists in this period were responding to the rapid changes in society and culture by forging new paths in artistic expression. These shifts laid the groundwork for the radical transformations in art that would characterize the 20th century, shaping the course of modernism and beyond. The role of exhibitions and art criticism. Exhibitions and art criticism played a pivotal role in the development and spread of Post-Impressionism. These elements helped shape public perception of the movement and played a key part in how the artists were received by both their contemporaries and future generations. The relationship between exhibitions, criticism, and the rise of new artistic movements was complex. While many Post-Impressionist artists faced initial rejection and harsh criticism, these exhibitions ultimately allowed their work to be seen, discussed, and understood in new ways. In the late 19th century, the organization of exhibitions was often a reflection of the broader tensions within the art world. Artists who were aligned with traditional academic painting had their works exhibited in the prestigious Salon, an official annual exhibition hosted by the French government. However, as new movements like Impressionism began to gain momentum, many artists found themselves at odds with the established norms. The Salon, with its rigid criteria and preference for academic subjects, was increasingly seen as a barrier to the artistic freedom that many young artists, including the Post-Impressionists, sought. The Impressionists, in particular, were the first to challenge the Salon system directly. In 1874, a group of artists, including Claude Monet, Edgar Degas, and Pierre-Auguste Renoir, organized their own exhibition in protest of the Salon's rejection of their works. This independent exhibition marked a significant turning point in the relationship between artists and institutions. While the exhibition was met with ridicule and scorn from many critics, it was crucial in gaining attention for the new movement. It also set a precedent for future alternative exhibitions, allowing artists to bypass traditional venues and present their works directly to the public. By the time Post-Impressionism emerged in the 1880s, these alternative exhibitions had become an established practice. The most notable of these was the Exposition des Indépendants, held annually from 1884 onward, which allowed artists to exhibit their works without submitting to the Salon's official selection process. These exhibitions provided a platform for the Post-Impressionists, who, like the Impressionists before them, were often rejected by traditional venues. Artists such as Paul Cézanne, Vincent van Gogh, and Georges Seurat exhibited their works in these non-conventional spaces, where they were able to engage with a broader audience and push the boundaries of accepted artistic norms. However, art criticism played a mixed role in the reception of Post-Impressionist works. While some critics recognized the novelty and emotional power of the new styles, many were initially dismissive. Prominent critics like Jules Claretie and Albert Wolff frequently derided the artists' unconventional techniques, accusing them of abandoning realism and craftsmanship. Yet, as the movement gained momentum, more progressive critics began to acknowledge the innovative nature of Post-Impressionism and its departure from traditional representation. This shift in critical reception helped solidify the legacy of the Post-Impressionist artists, leading to their eventual acceptance as foundational figures in the development of modern art. Ultimately, exhibitions and art criticism played an integral role in shaping the legacy of Post-Impressionism. The alternative exhibitions provided a space for innovation, and despite initial criticism, they helped bring the Post-Impressionists' groundbreaking works into the public eye. Over time, art criticism evolved, and the contributions of these artists became recognized as central to the development of modern art. Influence of symbolism and other contemporary movements. The influence of symbolism, along with other contemporary movements, had a profound impact on the development of Post-Impressionism. As the 19th century drew to a close, the art world was undergoing significant transformations. Artists were increasingly turning away from the strict representational demands of realism and academic tradition and embracing a more subjective, emotional, and symbolic approach to art. This shift was driven in part by the growing interest in spirituality, mysticism, and the exploration of the inner psyche, themes that resonated strongly with the Post-Impressionists as they sought to go beyond mere observation of the external world. Symbolism, a movement that emerged in the 1880s, was one of the most significant contemporary influences on Post-Impressionist artists. Symbolist artists rejected the materialism and rationality of the modern world, instead focusing on the spiritual, the emotional, and the symbolic. They were particularly interested in evoking feelings and experiences through metaphorical and dreamlike imagery, rather than depicting reality in a straightforward manner. This fascination with the unseen, the inner world, and the dream state resonated deeply with Post-Impressionist painters, who were increasingly turning to personal symbolism in their work. Paul Gauguin, in particular, was heavily influenced by symbolism. His move to Tahiti and his exploration of primitivism were informed by his desire to escape the industrialized world and its societal constraints. Gauguin's work, such as Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? Exemplifies his quest to find deeper, existential meaning beyond the physical world. His use of bold color, simplified forms, and symbolic imagery aimed to convey emotional truths rather than literal depictions of reality. Gauguin's embrace of symbolism also led him to explore themes of spirituality, mythology, and the unconscious, all of which would deeply influence the trajectory of modern art. In addition to symbolism, other contemporary movements such as Japonism and the burgeoning interest in the unconscious mind also shaped the Post-Impressionists. Japonism, the influence of Japanese art and aesthetics on Western artists, was particularly important in the development of color and composition. Japanese woodblock prints, with their flat planes, bold outlines, and emphasis on the decorative, inspired many Post-Impressionist artists to experiment with new approaches to visual space. Van Gogh, for example, was captivated by Japanese prints and incorporated their stylistic elements into his own work. Simultaneously, the exploration of the unconscious mind and psychological states was gaining traction through the rise of modern psychology and the work of figures like Sigmund Freud. This intellectual movement encouraged artists to delve into more personal, introspective, and emotional realms in their work, creating an emphasis on individual perception and inner experiences. Artists like Vincent van Gogh, whose work conveys a deep emotional intensity, and Paul Cézanne, with his focus on structure and underlying form, were both influenced by these developments. Thus, symbolism, Japonism, and contemporary intellectual movements all played a crucial role in shaping the vision of Post-Impressionist artists. These influences helped push the boundaries of artistic representation, encouraging a deeper exploration of emotion, symbolism, and subjective experience that laid the groundwork for the modern art movements of the 20th century. Chapter 3, Paul Cézanne, the Father of Modern Art. Paul Cézanne is often heralded as the father of modern art, a title that reflects his pivotal role in the transition from 19th century artistic traditions to the bold, innovative movements of the 20th century. His work bridged the gap between Impressionism and the radical developments that would follow, such as Cubism and abstraction. Cézanne's dedication to exploring the formal aspects of painting, structure, color, and perception, redefined the possibilities of visual art, influencing countless artists and shaping the course of modernism. Born in 1839 in Aix-en-Provence, Cézanne initially studied law before pursuing his passion for painting. In his early years, he was influenced by the work of the Impressionists, particularly their emphasis on light and color. However, Cézanne was never content to simply follow the trends of his time. While he experimented with the loose brushwork and vivid color of the Impressionists, he sought to go beyond their focus on fleeting moments and atmospheric effects. Cézanne was interested in the underlying structure of the natural world, and his works often focus on the geometric forms he believed were present in nature. He saw the world as a collection of shapes, cylinders, spheres, and cones, stripped of illusionistic detail. One of the key aspects of Cézanne's work was his approach to perspective. While traditional art adhered to linear perspective to create the illusion of depth, Cézanne rejected this approach in favor of a more complex, multifaceted view of space. He often used multiple perspectives within a single composition, creating a sense of depth and volume without relying on a fixed point of view. This technique laid the groundwork for the later development of Cubism, particularly the work of Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, who would further explore the fragmentation of space and form. Cézanne's use of color was also groundbreaking. Instead of relying on the traditional use of light and shadow to model forms, he applied color in a more systematic and expressive way. His brushstrokes were thick and deliberate, and he often used color to define the contours and volumes of objects, breaking away from the idea that color should simply represent light and shadow. This innovative approach to color and form revolutionized the way artists would think about the relationship between color and structure. Although Cézanne was not widely recognized during his lifetime and struggled with acceptance within the Parisian art establishment, his influence grew dramatically after his death in 1906. His work had a profound impact on the development of modern art, influencing not only Cubism, but also Fauvism, Expressionism, and abstract art. Cézanne's commitment to exploring the essential forms and structures of the world around him, combined with his innovative use of color and perspective, cemented his legacy as one of the most important figures in the history of art. His pursuit of a deeper truth in nature, through both form and color, ultimately marked him as a revolutionary figure in the development of modern artistic expression. Cézanne's early life and artistic journey. Paul Cézanne's journey into the world of art was shaped by both his early life experiences and his unwavering commitment to pushing the boundaries of traditional painting. Born on January 19, 1839, in Aix-en-Provence, France, Cézanne was the son of a wealthy, self-made banker. His early years were marked by privilege, yet he felt a deep conflict between his family's wishes for him to pursue a stable career in law and his own desire to be an artist. He initially enrolled at the law school in Aix, but it was clear from the outset that his true passion lay in painting. In 1861, Cézanne moved to Paris to study at the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts. There, he was exposed to the academic art tradition, which emphasized classical techniques and the mastery of perspective, anatomy, and composition. Yet Cézanne struggled to fit into the conventional framework of academic art. While many of his contemporaries gravitated toward the salon tradition, which valued polished, idealized depictions of reality, Cézanne found himself yearning for something more personal and expressive. Early in his career, Cézanne was influenced by the work of the Romantic and Realist painters, as well as the early Impressionists. He admired the way they approached light and color, but he felt that their focus on capturing fleeting moments of nature lacked the solidity and permanence that he sought in his own work. Cézanne's first few years in Paris were difficult, as his early works were met with little acceptance. He faced rejection from the official Salon, the annual exhibition of the French Academy, and his paintings were often criticized for their unconventional style. Nonetheless, he continued to experiment with new techniques and ideas. His exposure to the works of artists like Gustave Courbet, Edouard Manet, and the early Impressionists pushed him to develop his own unique style. During this time, Cézanne developed a deep appreciation for the role of structure in art. Unlike the Impressionists, who were focused on capturing the ephemeral effects of light, Cézanne wanted to convey the solidity and permanence of the natural world. His works from this period show his developing interest in the geometric forms that he believed lay beneath the surface of objects in nature, anticipating the formal innovations that would define his later works. In the 1870s, Cézanne began to gain more recognition for his work, but his career continued to be marked by a sense of isolation. He was often critical of the Impressionists, despite sharing some of their concerns with light and color. Throughout his life, Cézanne was plagued by self-doubt and struggled with the tension between his desire to innovate and the pressure to conform to established norms. His early artistic journey, marked by rejection and inner conflict, ultimately led him to develop the distinctive style that would later make him a central figure in the development of modern art. Cézanne's perseverance and his dedication to searching for the deeper truths of nature through his paintings would set him apart as one of the most influential artists of his time. Key techniques and innovations. Paul Cézanne's work is defined by a series of groundbreaking techniques and innovations that challenged the artistic norms of his time. His approach to painting was both methodical and revolutionary, and his exploration of form, color, and perspective laid the foundation for many modern art movements, including Cubism and abstract art. One of his most significant contributions was his shift away from traditional perspective and his quest to find a more dynamic, structural approach to representing the world. One of the key techniques Cézanne developed was his use of color to define form and space. While the academic tradition focused on light and shadow to create depth and volume, Cézanne used color in a much more deliberate and innovative way. Instead of using light to model shapes, he applied color in patches and strokes, allowing the colors to act as building blocks that created a sense of volume and structure. His brushwork was thick and tactile, often leaving visible, expressive strokes that gave his paintings a palpable texture. This technique helped him create a sense of depth that was not based on illusionistic perspective, but rather on the interplay of colors and their interaction within the composition. Cézanne was also fascinated by the idea of multiple perspectives within a single composition. Unlike traditional artists who adhered to a fixed point of view, Cézanne would depict objects from various angles and viewpoints, often within the same painting. This was especially evident in his still lifes and landscapes, where objects such as apples or mountains were shown from different perspectives simultaneously. By doing so, Cézanne introduced a more fragmented and dynamic view of space, foreshadowing the developments of Cubism in the early 20th century. His handling of perspective was not about adhering to realistic spatial rules, but about presenting a more subjective and complex experience of seeing. In addition to his approach to color and perspective, Cézanne's exploration of geometric forms was a major innovation in his work. He believed that nature could be broken down into simple geometric shapes like cubes, spheres, and cones. He often painted landscapes, still lifes, and figures using these forms as the foundation of his compositions. This reduction of the natural world into its essential geometric elements was an important precursor to Cubism, where artists like Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque would go on to deconstruct objects into abstract shapes and planes. Cézanne's commitment to breaking away from traditional artistic conventions and his relentless exploration of form, color, and perspective ultimately redefined the role of the painter. His innovations in technique and his conceptual approach to the structure of visual space made him a foundational figure in the evolution of modern art. The role of color and brushwork. Paul Cézanne's innovative use of color and brushwork played a central role in the transformation of modern painting. These elements became integral to his distinct style and served as a means to express the deeper structural relationships between forms and the natural world. Cézanne was not just concerned with the representation of light or color in a purely decorative sense. For him, color and brushwork were essential tools for building structure, conveying depth, and creating emotional resonance in his paintings. Cézanne's approach to color was revolutionary in that he used it as a primary means of defining form and space. Traditional painting, influenced by academic conventions, often relied on modeling with light and shadow to create volume and depth. Cézanne, however, sought to break free from this illusionistic approach. Instead of focusing on light as the source of form, he used contrasting and complementary colors to establish structure. He would apply colors in separate patches or strokes, using them to build up a three-dimensional effect. This approach was radical at the time, as it emphasized color's role as a tool for defining the shapes and volumes of objects rather than simply mimicking the effects of light. His use of color was not uniform or smooth. The individual brushstrokes were visible, creating a textured surface that gave his paintings a palpable, almost sculptural quality. Cézanne's brushwork, likewise, was an essential component of his distinctive style. His strokes were deliberate and methodical, and he often painted in layers, building up texture and depth as he worked. His brushwork was less about the fluidity and immediacy seen in the Impressionist style, and more about a constructed, thought-out approach to surface and form. This approach was evident in his landscapes, still lifes, and portraits, where his brushstrokes were thick and purposeful, conveying both the materiality of the objects he painted and their underlying structure. The visible strokes gave the works a sense of energy and presence, making the act of painting itself part of the composition. In his later works, the brushstrokes became more dynamic, contributing to the feeling of movement within the static scene. Another notable aspect of Cézanne's brushwork was his use of short, repetitive strokes that seemed to build up layers of color and texture, often creating a sense of depth and volume. This technique, when combined with his use of color, allowed him to represent the natural world not as an illusion, but as a series of interrelated forms, constantly shifting and interacting. His brushstrokes also imbued his paintings with a rhythm and energy, making the process of painting itself an integral part of the final image. Cézanne's role as a pioneer in the use of color and brushwork cannot be overstated. His groundbreaking techniques laid the groundwork for many of the artistic developments of the 20th century, influencing movements like Cubism, Fauvism, and even abstract art. By using color not just to imitate the world but to shape it, and by applying brushstrokes that were expressive and structural, Cézanne redefined the possibilities of painting and opened new pathways for future artists. Cézanne's impact on Cubism and modern art. Paul Cézanne's influence on the development of Cubism and modern art is profound and far-reaching. Although his work did not directly align with the geometric abstraction that defined Cubism, his explorations of form, structure, and perspective laid the foundational principles that would later be expanded upon by artists such as Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. Cézanne's ability to distill complex subjects into geometric shapes, his experimental use of perspective, and his revolutionary approach to color and brushwork all provided the tools and the theoretical groundwork for the Cubist movement and the broader evolution of modern art. Cézanne's focus on the underlying structure of the natural world, often reducing objects to basic geometric forms like cones, spheres, and cylinders, was one of his most significant contributions to the development of Cubism. This approach allowed him to see beyond the surface of objects and instead represent them in a way that emphasized their spatial relationships and volume. His depictions of landscapes, still lifes, and figures, often fragmented and composed of simplified shapes, revealed the potential for representing reality in a more abstract manner. Cézanne's belief that everything in nature is based on the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone became a guiding principle for later artists. His use of multiple viewpoints within a single composition also anticipated Cubism's fragmentation of form and the simultaneous representation of various perspectives. Picasso and Braque, who are often credited with founding Cubism in the early 20th century, were deeply influenced by Cézanne's work. Both artists studied Cézanne's paintings closely and drew inspiration from his explorations of geometric shapes and the manipulation of perspective. Cézanne's legacy is especially evident in the Cubist method of breaking down subjects into their fundamental geometric components, presenting them from multiple angles within the same painting. Just as Cézanne had done, Picasso and Braque sought to capture the essence of their subjects, but they took this exploration to new extremes, using abstraction to deconstruct objects and scenes entirely. Cézanne's impact extended beyond Cubism. His work also laid the groundwork for movements such as Fauvism and abstract expressionism. His emphasis on color as a structuring element of form influenced the vibrant palettes of the Fauve, while his emotional use of color and brushwork had a lasting impact on the development of expressionist art. Cézanne's formal experiments with color, texture, and structure also paved the way for the abstraction that would emerge in the 20th century. In sum, Cézanne's revolutionary approach to form, perspective, and color provided a springboard for the artists who would push the boundaries of representation in the 20th century. His work, although rooted in the observation of nature, transcended naturalistic depiction and opened the door for abstraction, fragmentation, and the exploration of new artistic languages that defined the modern era. His influence on Cubism and modern art is both direct and enduring, making him one of the most important figures in the history of Western art. Analysis of major works: Mont Sainte-Victoire, The Bathers. Two of Paul Cézanne's most iconic works, Mont Sainte-Victoire and The Bathers, provide deep insights into his artistic evolution and his groundbreaking approach to form, color, and space. Both paintings exemplify Cézanne's quest to capture the underlying structure of the natural world and his departure from traditional representational techniques. These masterpieces also showcase his unique ability to merge emotion with structure, a combination that would leave a lasting mark on the trajectory of modern art. Mont Sainte-Victoire is a series of paintings that Cézanne created over the course of several years, focusing on a distinctive mountain near his home in Aix-en-Provence. The mountain, a central motif in his work, became a symbol of his interest in the stability and permanence of nature. In these paintings, Cézanne explored the notion of space and perspective in a way that broke away from traditional linear perspective. The mountain is depicted from different angles, showing the same scene from multiple viewpoints, which creates a sense of depth and movement within the composition. Rather than using a fixed perspective, Cézanne depicted the landscape as a series of interrelated planes and volumes, each defined by a distinct color. His use of color in Mont Sainte-Victoire was particularly revolutionary, as he applied it not just to represent light and shadow, but as a tool to structure the landscape, making color an integral part of the painting's spatial organization. In contrast, the Bathers series represents Cézanne's exploration of the human figure, a subject he approached with the same desire for structural clarity. The figures in the Bathers are not idealized or anatomically precise, but rather simplified and composed of geometric shapes. The bodies are often angular and blocky, reflecting Cézanne's fascination with the way forms could be broken down into basic geometric structures. In these works, Cézanne also played with the relationship between the figures and the surrounding landscape, integrating the two in a way that created a harmonious yet dynamic composition. The use of color in the Bathers is similarly expressive, with Cézanne applying rich, vibrant hues to define the bodies and the environment. The soft, blending colors in the figures contrast with the more defined, structured colors of the landscape, further highlighting his exploration of how color can serve both as representation and as a formal element. Both Mont Sainte-Victoire and the Bathers are essential to understanding Cézanne's artistic legacy. In these works, Cézanne sought to bridge the gap between the visible world and the emotional, structural core beneath it. His innovative use of color and form, as well as his rejection of conventional perspective, created a new way of seeing the world, one that would influence the development of modern art, particularly in movements like Cubism and abstraction. These works exemplify his relentless pursuit of a deeper truth in art, one that transcended naturalistic representation and embraced the essence of the subject. Chapter 4: Vincent van Gogh, Expression Through Color and Emotion. Vincent van Gogh is one of the most celebrated figures in the history of art, known for his intense use of color and emotionally charged brushwork. His paintings, often imbued with a deep sense of personal turmoil and an unwavering desire to convey the essence of his subjects, mark a significant departure from traditional artistic techniques. Van Gogh's work, which bridged the gap between Post-Impressionism and Expressionism, introduced a powerful emotional element to painting that would inspire generations of artists. Born in 1853 in the Netherlands, Van Gogh initially struggled to find his place in the art world. His early years as a painter were marked by a sense of isolation and a lack of recognition. His early works, including still lifes and scenes of rural life, were somber in tone, influenced by his interest in the Dutch realist tradition. However, after moving to Paris in 1886, Van Gogh encountered the vibrant colors and loose brushwork of the Impressionists, which had a profound effect on his artistic development. Inspired by the works of artists such as Claude Monet, Van Gogh began to experiment with brighter colors and more expressive brushwork. His exposure to the work of the Impressionists, coupled with his own struggles with mental health, led him to create a style that was deeply emotional and personal. One of Van Gogh's most distinctive features as an artist was his use of color. Unlike the Impressionists, who used color to capture the transient effects of light, Van Gogh used color symbolically to express emotion. He often employed bold, contrasting colors in his paintings, allowing the vibrancy of the hues to convey his inner feelings. For example, in his famous Starry Night, the swirling blues and yellows evoke a sense of restlessness and yearning, reflecting Van Gogh's inner turmoil. The expressive brushwork in this painting, with its thick, impassioned strokes, further emphasizes the emotional intensity of the scene. Similarly, in works like Sunflowers and The Bedroom, Van Gogh used color to imbue ordinary subjects with deep emotional resonance, transforming them into powerful symbols of his personal experience. Van Gogh's brushwork was equally revolutionary. His thick, textured strokes created a sense of movement and vitality, lending his paintings a dynamic, almost sculptural quality. His swirling, gestural marks gave his work a sense of urgency and raw emotion, often mirroring his internal struggles. This technique is particularly evident in works like Wheatfield with Crows and The Night Café, where the brushstrokes seem to vibrate with intensity, reflecting Van Gogh's restless mind. Although Van Gogh's work was largely ignored during his lifetime, his expressive use of color and emotion would have a profound influence on the development of modern art. His ability to communicate inner feelings through color and brushwork laid the foundation for the Expressionist movement, which would flourish in the early 20th century. Van Gogh's legacy as an artist is not only in the beauty of his paintings, but also in the depth of emotion and expression that they convey. His work continues to resonate with viewers today, offering a poignant and timeless reminder of the power of art to capture the human experience. Van Gogh's life and artistic struggles. Vincent van Gogh's life was marked by intense personal struggles and profound emotional turmoil, which deeply influenced his art. Born on March 30th, 1853, in the Netherlands, Van Gogh's early years were shaped by a strict religious upbringing and a series of unfulfilled attempts to find his place in the world. He initially worked as a missionary, then as an art dealer, but neither of these careers satisfied him. It was only later in life, after a period of personal crisis, that he fully committed to painting. Despite his deep passion for art, Van Gogh's journey to becoming one of the most famous artists in history was plagued by isolation, mental health issues, and a lack of recognition. Van Gogh's artistic career began in earnest around 1880 when he decided to become a full-time painter. Early on, he struggled to develop his style, influenced by the Dutch realists and, later, by the French Impressionists. His early works, including somber, dark-toned paintings like The Potato Eaters, reflect his struggle to convey the emotional weight of human experience. Van Gogh's early years as an artist were fraught with financial hardship, emotional instability, and a lack of formal training. However, this period also marked the beginning of his lifelong quest to express profound emotion through his artwork. In 1886, Van Gogh moved to Paris, where he encountered the vibrant world of the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist movements. Here, he began to experiment with brighter colors and more fluid brush strokes, influenced by artists like Claude Monet and Georges Seurat. His artistic development took a more dynamic turn, moving away from the somber tones of his early works to a more expressive, colorful approach. It was during this time that Van Gogh's emotional struggles also intensified. He became increasingly isolated, battling periods of intense mental illness and depression. His mental state would have a significant impact on his art, with his works becoming even more personal and intense in their emotional expression. In 1888, Van Gogh moved to Arles in the south of France, where he painted some of his most famous works, including Sunflowers, The Bedroom, and The Yellow House. This period was marked by brief bursts of creativity and intense emotional volatility. His infamous ear-cutting incident, a result of a breakdown during his time in Arles, symbolized the growing instability that plagued his life. Despite his artistic achievements, Van Gogh remained largely unrecognized during his lifetime, with only a handful of works sold. His struggle for recognition and internal battles with his mental health culminated in his tragic death from a gunshot wound in 1890 at the age of 37. Van Gogh's life and struggles remain an integral part of his legacy, as they deeply influenced his ability to express raw emotion through his art. His works, filled with color and intensity, continue to resonate with audiences, offering an enduring testament to the emotional power of painting. Use of bold color and emotional brushstrokes. Vincent van Gogh's use of bold color and emotional brushstrokes is one of the defining features of his work and played a crucial role in transforming the landscape of modern art. His innovative approach to color and technique allowed him to convey emotion in ways that had not been seen before, breaking away from the more restrained color palettes and linear brushwork of earlier artistic traditions. Van Gogh's intense, vivid colors and dynamic brushstrokes became a means of expressing his inner turmoil, joy, and profound connection to the world around him. Color for Van Gogh was not just a way to represent reality, it was a tool for emotional expression. Unlike earlier artists who often used color in a more subdued or naturalistic manner, Van Gogh embraced vivid, contrasting hues to convey his psychological state and to heighten the emotional impact of his work. For instance, in The Starry Night, the swirling blues and radiant yellows do not simply represent a night sky, but evoke a sense of restless energy and yearning. The use of color in this way was revolutionary. By applying color so dramatically, Van Gogh captured the turbulence of his emotional world, giving viewers insight into his psyche rather than just his external surroundings. His approach to color was also influenced by his time in Paris, where he encountered the vibrant palette of the Impressionists. However, Van Gogh took this experimentation further, using color symbolically to express emotion. He often paired complementary colors, such as bright oranges and blues, to create tension and intensity in his works. This use of bold color was not just for visual impact. It was an integral part of his artistic language, allowing him to communicate his inner struggles and moments of clarity. Van Gogh's brushstrokes were equally crucial in conveying emotion. His thick, impassioned strokes were expressive and unrestrained, a departure from the smooth, controlled technique favored by many of his contemporaries. The physical act of painting itself seemed to become a means of emotional release for Van Gogh. In works like Wheatfield with Crows and The Night Café, the swirling, almost violent brushstrokes amplify the emotional intensity of the scenes. The brushstrokes do not simply create texture, they add to the rhythm of the painting, creating a sense of movement and urgency that mirrors Van Gogh's internal state. Together, Van Gogh's bold color choices and emotional brushwork created a new visual language, one that transcended the boundaries of realistic representation and tapped directly into the realm of subjective experience. His paintings are a vivid portrayal of his emotional landscape, allowing viewers to not only see the world as he saw it, but also to feel what he felt. This combination of expressive color and dynamic brushwork was revolutionary and paved the way for the Expressionist movement, profoundly influencing modern art in the 20th century. Themes of mental health, loneliness, and nature. Vincent van Gogh's work is deeply intertwined with the themes of mental health, loneliness, and nature, reflecting the complexity of his personal struggles and his relationship with the world around him. These themes are not only central to his life, but also pivotal in understanding the emotional intensity of his art. Throughout his career, Van Gogh used his paintings as a way to express his inner turmoil, the isolation he often felt, and his profound connection to the natural world. Mental health is perhaps the most pervasive theme in Van Gogh's life and work. His ongoing battle with depression, anxiety, and intense mood swings is well documented, and it is clear that these struggles shaped both the content and the style of his paintings. Van Gogh's psychological distress is often communicated through the emotional intensity of his brushstrokes and the boldness of his color choices. In works like The Night Café and Wheatfield with Crows, the swirling, chaotic brushwork and stark color contrasts seem to mirror his inner unrest. The exaggerated, almost frenetic movement in these paintings reflects his emotional instability, which often led him to view the world through a distorted lens. His struggle with mental illness was not just a personal battle, but a key element in the emotional depth of his artistic vision. Loneliness also features prominently in Van Gogh's life and works. His isolation from society, his family, and the artistic community left him feeling profoundly alone. His time in Paris, Arles, and later in the St. Paul de Mausole Asylum was marked by a sense of disconnection from others. This solitude is echoed in the quiet, introspective nature of many of his paintings, such as The Bedroom and Self-Portrait with Bandaged Ear. In these works, the empty rooms and vacant gazes reflect a profound sense of isolation, where Van Gogh's only companion seems to be his own troubled mind. His lack of acceptance and recognition during his lifetime likely exacerbated his feelings of alienation, and this sense of loneliness is embedded in the emotional texture of his art. Nature, however, offered Van Gogh a source of solace and inspiration. Many of his most celebrated paintings, including sunflowers, irises, and the olive trees, depict the beauty and vibrancy of the natural world. Despite his personal struggles, Van Gogh often found comfort and meaning in nature, seeing it as a way to express both the harmony and chaos he experienced internally. His connection to nature is particularly evident in his landscapes, where he used color and brushwork to depict the ever-changing moods of the environment. In Starry Night, the swirling sky seems to capture both the beauty and the turbulence of Van Gogh's mind, showing how his emotional state was intricately tied to his perception of nature. Through these themes of mental health, loneliness, and nature, Van Gogh's art became a powerful means of exploring the complexity of the human condition. His ability to translate personal pain and emotional depth into vivid, expressive paintings transformed the way artists approached the depiction of inner life and established Van Gogh as one of the most emotionally resonant figures in the history of art. Iconic works: Starry Night, Sunflowers, The Bedroom. Vincent van Gogh's most iconic works, Starry Night, Sunflowers, and The Bedroom, are celebrated not only for their stunning visual impact, but also for their deep emotional resonance. Each of these paintings exemplifies Van Gogh's innovative use of color, dynamic brushwork, and his ability to infuse everyday subjects with intense personal meaning. These masterpieces reflect his struggle with mental health, his connection to nature, and his search for peace and stability amidst personal chaos. Starry Night, perhaps Van Gogh's most famous painting, is a prime example of his emotional approach to landscape painting. Created in 1889 while Van Gogh was residing in the St. Paul de Moselle Asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, Starry Night depicts a swirling night sky over a quiet village. The painting's intense blues and bright yellows, along with the exaggerated, undulating brushstrokes, convey a sense of movement and emotional turbulence. The sky seems alive, pulsating with energy, while the tranquil village below contrasts with the chaos above, mirroring Van Gogh's own inner conflict. The scene is not an accurate representation of the view outside his window, but a deeply subjective interpretation, one that blends Van Gogh's personal emotions with his perception of the world. Sunflowers, another of Van Gogh's iconic works, showcases his ability to turn simple subjects into profound emotional statements. Painted in 1888, this series of still lifes features a vibrant arrangement of sunflowers in a vase. Van Gogh's use of bold, contrasting colors, vivid yellows, oranges, and deep browns, imbues the flowers with life and energy, reflecting his own emotional intensity. The sunflowers, in their various stages of bloom, symbolically capture both life and decay, representing the passage of time and the fleeting nature of beauty. Van Gogh's choice to depict the flowers in a direct, almost raw manner, with thick, impassioned brushstrokes, underscores the emotional significance he attached to even the most commonplace objects. The Bedroom, painted in 1888 during Van Gogh's time in Arles, is another deeply personal work. The painting depicts Van Gogh's modest bedroom, rendered in a simple yet striking composition. The use of bold, contrasting colors and the exaggerated angles create a sense of discomfort and unease, reflecting the artist's inner turmoil and desire for stability. Unlike typical depictions of serene domestic interiors, the bedroom feels almost claustrophobic, as if the walls themselves are closing in on the viewer. The distorted proportions and vivid colors are indicative of Van Gogh's psychological state, yet the room itself is also a sanctuary, a place where he sought rest and solace from the emotional struggles that plagued him. In Starry Night, Sunflowers, and The Bedroom, Van Gogh not only explored his personal struggles, but also sought to communicate the depths of his emotional experience through color, form, and brushwork. These works remain central to his legacy, capturing the complexity of his inner world and the enduring power of his artistic expression. Through these masterpieces, Van Gogh transformed the way art could convey emotion, leaving an indelible mark on the history of Western art. Van Gogh's lasting influence on Expressionism. Vincent van Gogh's contributions to modern art extend far beyond his own lifetime, and his influence on the Expressionist movement is particularly profound. Known for his bold use of color, dynamic brushwork, and emotionally charged compositions, Van Gogh revolutionized how art could communicate the inner workings of the human psyche. His paintings, deeply tied to his own emotional experiences and struggles, laid the groundwork for the Expressionist artists who would follow, shaping the development of a movement that emphasized the subjective, emotional, and symbolic over the objective and realistic. One of the most significant aspects of Van Gogh's influence on Expressionism is his use of color. His revolutionary approach to color went beyond mere representation. For Van Gogh, color became a powerful tool for emotional expression. He used vibrant, often contrasting colors to evoke particular feelings, creating an emotional resonance that spoke to the viewer's own inner experience. Works such as The Starry Night and Sunflowers demonstrate how Van Gogh harnessed color to convey his intense emotional states. His use of swirling, luminous blues and fiery yellows in Starry Night, for example, created a sense of restlessness and turbulence that resonated with the psychological intensity of his inner world. This approach to color as a vehicle for emotional communication would deeply influence later Expressionist artists who sought to evoke raw emotion and psychological depth in their work. Van Gogh's brushwork was equally groundbreaking. His thick, energetic strokes imbued his paintings with a sense of immediacy and emotional urgency. In pieces like Wheatfield with Crows and The Night Cafe, the exaggerated, almost violent brushstrokes convey a sense of movement, tension, and emotional distress. This dynamic brushwork, which broke free from the conventions of smooth, controlled technique, became a hallmark of Expressionism. Artists such as Edvard Munch, Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, and Wassily Kandinsky would adopt similar gestural brushstrokes, using them to communicate their own inner turmoil and existential concerns. Moreover, Van Gogh's ability to distill human emotion into his art resonated with Expressionist artists who sought to express the deeper, often darker aspects of the human experience. His exploration of themes like isolation, mental health, and existential anxiety created a bridge between the personal and the universal. Expressionist painters, like those in the German Die Brücke movement, were similarly interested in depicting the raw emotional and psychological states of their subjects, moving away from realism and toward abstraction and distortion. Through his innovative use of color, brushwork, and emotional depth, Van Gogh set the stage for the Expressionist movement, which would fully emerge in the early 20th century. His works paved the way for artists to explore the emotional and psychological dimensions of life, marking a decisive shift in the trajectory of modern art. Van Gogh's legacy as an emotional pioneer in painting continues to influence artists to this day, particularly those seeking to capture the complexities of human feeling and experience in their work. Chapter 5, Georges Seurat and the Technique of Pointillism. Georges Seurat, a pivotal figure in the development of Post-Impressionism, is best known for pioneering the technique of pointillism, a revolutionary approach to painting that transformed the use of color and light. Seurat's method, often referred to as divisionism in its technical form, was a response to the more spontaneous, loose brushwork of the Impressionists. His precise and scientific approach to color and form sought to elevate the emotional and optical effects of painting to a new level, combining artistic intuition with an understanding of color theory. Seurat developed pointillism in the late 1880s as a way to create a more structured, methodical approach to the vibrant colors that Impressionism had embraced. Rather than blending pigments on the palette or mixing colors on the canvas, Seurat applied small, distinct dots of pure color side by side. These dots, placed in such a way that they are not blended but allowed to merge visually when seen from a distance, were intended to maximize the brightness and luminosity of the color. By using the optical mixing of colors rather than physical blending, Seurat took advantage of the scientific principles of color perception, which suggested that juxtaposing small areas of complementary colors would result in a more vibrant, glowing effect when viewed from a distance. One of Seurat's most famous works, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, demonstrates the power and precision of his pointillist technique. The painting depicts a leisurely scene of Parisians enjoying a sunny afternoon in a park. The work is meticulously composed, with each figure and element in the scene made up of tiny, carefully placed dots of color. The result is a remarkable harmony between form and color, as the dots, viewed from a distance, create a luminous effect that brings the entire scene to life. This careful method of applying paint creates a sense of clarity and order, in stark contrast to the spontaneous and often chaotic brushwork of the Impressionists. Seurat's innovative approach to color and technique was rooted in scientific experimentation, influenced by contemporary research into color theory, particularly the work of scientists like Michel-Eugène Chevreul and Ogden Rood. Seurat believed that by using complementary colors placed next to one another, he could create a greater sense of vibrancy and depth than could be achieved through traditional color mixing. This technique required patience and precision, and Seurat's works often took much longer to complete than those of his contemporaries. Seurat's work had a lasting impact on the development of modern art. While pointillism never fully supplanted other techniques, it significantly influenced later movements, including Fauvism and even the early stages of abstract art. Seurat's careful, methodical approach to painting brought a new level of sophistication to the handling of color, light, and form. And his legacy endures in the way artists continue to explore the relationship between color theory and visual perception. The development of pointillism and divisionism. Pointillism, a technique that revolutionized the art world in the late 19th century, emerged primarily through the work of Georges Seurat, who developed it as a method for achieving luminous color and optical depth. While often associated with Seurat, the technique is also linked to the broader Post-Impressionist movement's exploration of new ways to capture light, color, and form. Seurat's method of painting, based on scientific principles of color theory, would lay the foundation for a significant departure from traditional painting techniques and set the stage for modern artistic developments. At the heart of pointillism is the concept of divisionism, a technique based on the division of colors into separate, distinct dots or strokes. This method contrasted with the Impressionists' more blended approach, where colors were mixed on the palette or directly on the canvas. Instead of applying colors in traditional brushstrokes, Seurat placed small dots or strokes of pure color side by side. When viewed from a distance, these individual color dots merge in the viewer's eye, creating an optical blending effect that is brighter and more vibrant than mixed colors. This technique exploits the way the human eye perceives color, especially through complementary colors and their contrasting effects when placed next to each other. Seurat was influenced by scientific studies on color theory, particularly the work of chemist Michel-Eugène Chevreul, who explored the optical effects of color contrast and juxtaposition. Seurat applied these scientific findings to his work, believing that using pure colors and allowing the viewer's eye to blend them would enhance the luminosity of his paintings. His approach was based on the notion that this optical mixing would yield a richer and more vibrant color than the traditional methods of blending pigments. One of the key works demonstrating the technique of pointillism is Seurat's A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, 1884 to 1886. In this monumental painting, Seurat utilized the pointillist technique to depict a tranquil park scene filled with people relaxing on a sunny day. The canvas, composed of hundreds of thousands of tiny dots of color, creates an image that appears both harmonious and meticulously organized. The painting's glowing, vibrant colors, achieved through the juxtaposition of complementary hues, showcase the potential of pointillism to create a sense of luminosity, was unmatched in earlier works. While Seurat's style of pointillism was the most notable form of divisionism, the technique was later embraced and adapted by other artists, including Paul Signac, who was a key collaborator with Seurat. However, divisionism and pointillism, though initially influential, eventually fell out of favor as artists began to experiment with new forms of abstraction and expression. Despite this, Sauré's innovations had a lasting impact on the way color and light were treated in art, influencing later movements like Fauvism and even contributing to the development of early abstraction. The development of pointillism and divisionism marked a profound shift in how artists approached color and composition. By emphasizing optical effects and color contrast, Seurat's technique allowed artists to explore the relationship between the viewer's perception and the artwork itself, paving the way for future innovations in modern art. Seurat's pioneering use of color theory. Georges Seurat's pioneering use of color theory was a central element in his development of the pointillist technique, transforming the way artists approached color and light. Influenced by contemporary scientific studies on color perception, particularly those by Michel-Eugène Chevreul and Ogden Rood, Seurat sought to elevate the impact of color on the viewer's perception of an image. His method, which involved the precise application of small, distinct dots of pure color, was grounded in the belief that the human eye could merge these separate color units into a more luminous and vibrant whole. By following the principles of color theory, Seurat pushed beyond traditional artistic techniques to explore new optical effects and visual experiences. One of the key elements of Seurat's use of color theory was his understanding of complementary colors and their optical effects when placed next to one another. Chevreul's work on the optical mixing of colors in the 19th century had a profound influence on Seurat. According to Chevreul's theory, when complementary colors such as red and green or blue and orange are placed adjacent to each other, they create a sense of vibrancy and brightness that is greater than when mixed together on a palette. Seurat embraced this idea, using pure, unmixed colors to create the sense of luminosity that he sought in his paintings. This optical blending, rather than physical blending, allowed Seurat to achieve a vivid, glowing effect that traditional painting methods could not replicate. Seurat's application of color theory was not limited to his choice of complementary colors. He also used color contrasts to manipulate the viewer's emotional response to the scene. For example, in A Sunday Afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, the contrasts between warm and cool colors in the figures and background give the scene a sense of depth and movement, even though the composition itself is still and tranquil. This technique also allowed Seurat to heighten the atmospheric effects of his work, making light and shadow more dynamic through his careful application of color. By avoiding the conventional use of shading and instead relying on the interaction of colors to create volume, Seurat could convey both light and form in a way that felt more direct and immediate. Seurat's exploration of color also had a profound influence on the development of modern art. His innovations would inspire future movements like Fauvism, where bold color choices became central to the expression of emotion and the depiction of reality. Artists like Henri Matisse and André Derain, influenced by Seurat's color theory, adopted vivid and non-naturalistic colors to convey emotional resonance rather than realistic representation. Through his groundbreaking use of color theory, Seurat not only revolutionized the technique of painting, but also reshaped the way artists would think about the relationship between color, perception, and emotion, influencing generations of artists to come. Analysis of A Sunday Afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte. Georges Seurat's A Sunday Afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, 1884 to 1886, stands as one of the most iconic works of Post-Impressionism and is a quintessential example of the artist's revolutionary pointillist technique. This monumental painting, composed of countless tiny, distinct dots of pure color, depicts a leisurely afternoon scene at a popular Parisian park on the banks of the River Seine. Seurat's use of color, form, and composition in this work transcends traditional artistic methods, creating a new way of perceiving the visual world and making this piece a pivotal moment in the history of modern art. The most striking feature of La Grande Jatte is Seurat's meticulous application of color theory through pointillism, a technique where individual dots of complementary colors are placed next to one another to create optical mixing. From a distance, these dots blend into a harmonious, vibrant image with a luminosity that traditional blending could not achieve. The painting's vibrant colors, especially the contrast between cool blues and greens and warm oranges and reds, convey the light and atmosphere of a sunny afternoon. Seurat's use of color is not just decorative, it is an integral part of his effort to evoke mood and emotion, underscoring the calm yet detached atmosphere of the scene. The composition of a Sunday afternoon also demonstrates Seurat's skillful use of space and balance. The figures are arranged in a carefully orchestrated manner, each placed within the frame with precision, as though part of a larger, harmonious design. The park's setting, with its neatly aligned trees and figures, suggests an orderly, almost abstracted view of reality, where every detail serves a greater purpose in the overall composition. This sense of order contrasts with the spontaneity of the Impressionists, highlighting Seurat's desire to bring more structure and discipline to the depiction of everyday life. Seurat's figures, though depicted with the same vibrant color palette, possess a degree of formality and detachment that evokes a sense of distance between the people and the viewer. The figures seem isolated from one another, some standing, others seated, but rarely interacting. This separation underscores Seurat's exploration of modern urban life's social isolation, a theme that would resonate with future generations of artists and thinkers. There is no overt narrative in the piece. Instead, the painting captures a moment of stillness, a snapshot of leisure that feels almost timeless. In terms of technique, Seurat's precise and methodical approach to the creation of Le Grand Jet makes it a groundbreaking work. His use of pointillism, informed by scientific theories of color and perception, allowed Seurat to craft a new visual language that was both scientific and emotional. A Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte is not only a remarkable achievement in terms of technique, but also an enduring reflection of Seurat's vision of art as a careful synthesis of nature, color, and form. Seurat's influence on later avant-garde movements. Georges Seurat's pioneering approach to color and technique, particularly his development of pointillism, had a profound and lasting influence on the evolution of modern art. Seurat's method, which employed tiny, distinct dots of pure color to create vibrant, luminous compositions, was not only a radical departure from the painting techniques of his time, but also set the stage for the development of various avant-garde movements that followed. His focus on scientific color theory, optical mixing, and a more methodical approach to painting contributed to a new understanding of how artists could use color, light, and form to communicate complex emotional and visual effects. One of the most notable movements that Seurat directly influenced was Fauvism, which emerged at the turn of the 20th century. Artists such as Henri Matisse and André Derain were drawn to Seurat's emphasis on color, but rather than adhering to his precise dot technique, they embraced his belief in color's emotional and expressive power. In their work, color became an essential means of expression, free from the constraints of realistic representation. While Seurat sought to achieve luminosity through careful scientific color application, the Fauve sought to evoke powerful emotions through bold, non-naturalistic color choices. Nonetheless, Seurat's revolutionary approach to the use of color inspired these artists to explore its potential as a tool for subjective and emotional expression. Additionally, Seurat's method of creating harmonious compositions, based on careful planning and a sense of order, influenced the development of Cubism, particularly in the works of artists like Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. Cubism, which sought to break down and reassemble objects from multiple perspectives, echoed Seurat's use of structured forms and his focus on the geometric aspects of visual perception. While Seurat's work was still rooted in figuration, his emphasis on the structural organization of the picture plane and his use of color contrasts would resonate in the Cubists' deconstruction of form and space. Seurat's influence extended beyond the visual arts, also impacting the development of early abstraction. Artists like Wassily Kandinsky, who sought to move away from representational art entirely, were drawn to Seurat's ability to convey depth, movement, and emotion through a carefully constructed visual language. While Kandinsky's work diverged significantly from Seurat's, the latter's emphasis on color as a primary means of expression in painting provided the foundation for Kandinsky's exploration of non-objective art. In sum, Seurat's groundbreaking innovations in color theory and painting technique made a lasting impact on the course of modern art. His work provided a bridge between the scientific understanding of visual perception and the emotional expressionism that would characterize the avant-garde movements of the early 20th century. Through his influence, Seurat helped pave the way for artists to explore new ways of seeing and representing the world, ultimately reshaping the landscape of modern art. The scientific foundations of pointillism, developed by Georges Seurat in the late 19th century, was not just a new artistic technique, but also a method deeply rooted in scientific principles, particularly those related to color theory and optical perception. Seurat's use of small, distinct dots of color, which when viewed from a distance blend together to form a cohesive image, was grounded in the study of how the human eye perceives and processes color. His approach sought to exploit these scientific discoveries to create more luminous and vibrant works of art, challenging traditional techniques that involved mixing colors directly on the palette or canvas. At the heart of Seurat's technique was the concept of optical mixing, which relies on the viewer's eye to blend individual dots of color into a continuous, unified tone. This idea was inspired by the work of color theorists like Michel-Eugène Chevreul and Ogden Rood. Chevreul, a chemist and color theorist, studied how colors interact when placed next to each other. He discovered that when complementary colors, such as red and green or blue and orange, are juxtaposed, they appear more vibrant and lively to the eye than when mixed together. Seurat adopted this principle using contrasting, complementary colors placed side by side in small, distinct dots rather than mixing pigments on the palette. The optical blending of these colors, rather than their physical mixing, created a more brilliant, glowing effect. Seurat's method also incorporated a deeper understanding of the way light affects color. In his works, he did not simply apply colors as they appeared to the eye. Rather, he considered how different colors would interact with each other under varying lighting conditions. The division of color into small points, each interacting with its neighbors, allowed Seurat to capture the subtle nuances of light, creating a shimmering effect on the canvas. This careful attention to the science of color perception gave his paintings a luminous quality that was unprecedented at the time. In addition to color theory, Seurat was influenced by the growing interest in optics and visual perception. The development of the scientific study of how the eye perceives light and color was central to his approach. Seurat's work reflected the scientific spirit of the age, wherein artists began to look beyond subjective representation to understand and incorporate objective, empirical knowledge into their creative processes. Seurat's pointillism, with its reliance on scientific color theory and optical perception, represented a shift in artistic practice that bridged the gap between art and science. By incorporating these principles into his work, Seurat not only created a unique style of painting, but also opened up new possibilities for future generations of artists to explore the intersection of science, perception, and visual art. Chapter 6: Paul Gauguin, Exploring Symbolism and Primitivism. Paul Gauguin stands as one of the most influential figures in the development of modern art, particularly through his engagement with symbolism and primitivism. His work defied traditional artistic conventions, challenging the artistic establishment of his time and exploring new ways to represent emotion, spirituality, and the human experience. Gauguin's journey to break from realism and impressionism led him on a path toward abstraction and the exploration of symbolic and cultural meanings, establishing him as a central figure in Post-Impressionism. Gauguin's departure from conventional art began with his rejection of the established artistic traditions that dominated the Parisian art scene. His early works were heavily influenced by Impressionism, but he soon found himself dissatisfied with their focus on capturing transient moments of light and color. Seeking a deeper expression of emotion and meaning, Gauguin turned to symbolism, an artistic movement that emphasized the importance of emotion, imagination, and the depiction of symbolic content rather than objective reality. He believed that art should communicate an inner reality, tapping into the subconscious and representing universal human experiences. One of the key aspects of Gauguin's style was his exploration of color and form to evoke mood and emotion. He deliberately used bold, vibrant colors, often unrelated to naturalistic depictions, to communicate a sense of inner emotion or symbolic meaning. This departure from naturalism was most evident in his later works, such as Vision After the Sermon, 1888, in which he used color to express a spiritual vision rather than simply recreate a scene from reality. The juxtaposition of red and green and the stylized, simplified forms convey a heightened emotional and symbolic reality that transcends the physical world. Gauguin's search for a deeper understanding of human existence also led him to explore what he saw as the primitive cultures of the world. He famously traveled to Tahiti in 1891, drawn by the allure of an untouched, untainted way of life that he believed was closer to nature and the spiritual. This interest in primitivism is reflected in his paintings of Tahitian life, where he sought to represent the essence of human experience, unburdened by modernity. His works from this period, such as Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? 1897, are not literal depictions, but rather symbolic representations of existence, employing bold colors, exotic imagery, and a dreamlike quality to communicate complex spiritual themes. Through his engagement with symbolism and primitivism, Gauguin helped pave the way for later avant-garde movements, including Expressionism and Surrealism. His work challenged the conventions of representation, emphasizing the emotional and symbolic potential of art. By breaking free from natural and embracing bold color, abstraction, and cultural exploration, Gauguin left an indelible mark on the development of modern art, encouraging future generations of artists to seek meaning and emotional resonance beyond the surface of the physical world. Gauguin's search for artistic identity. Paul Gauguin's search for artistic identity was deeply intertwined with his desire to break away from the constraints of conventional art and to explore new ways of representing both human emotion and the mysteries of the inner world. His journey as an artist was one of constant reinvention, as he moved from one style to another in search of a deeper, more personal form of expression. Initially influenced by the realism and impressionism of his contemporaries, Gauguin quickly grew dissatisfied with these movements' focus on naturalism and the fleeting qualities of light and color. Instead, he began to embrace symbolism and sought a more abstract, emotional approach to art that would convey something beyond the observable world. Gauguin's early works, created while he was still closely associated with the Impressionist circle, reflect his interest in color and light. However, he soon found that the Impressionist emphasis on capturing the transient effects of nature left him unsatisfied. He felt that the movement lacked a deeper emotional or spiritual connection to the human experience. This dissatisfaction led Gauguin to experiment with different methods of representation, moving away from traditional techniques of light and shadow and toward a more expressive, symbolic use of color and form. His decision to use bold, flat colors and to simplify shapes marked the beginning of his quest to find an artistic language that could communicate his inner visions. A turning point in Gauguin's search for identity was his rejection of French society and his decision to leave for the south of France and later Tahiti. The idea of finding a more authentic and primitive form of existence, untouched by modern European life, became central to his artistic vision. He believed that by embracing the aesthetic qualities of non-Western cultures, particularly the primitive art of Oceania, he could discover a deeper connection to the spiritual and emotional essence of humanity. Gauguin's move to Tahiti in 1891 was part of this search for authenticity and identity, as he sought to immerse himself in a culture he viewed as pure and uncorrupted by Western civilization. His Tahitian works, such as Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? 1897, represent the culmination of his search for an artistic voice. In these works, Gauguin employed a highly symbolic, almost dreamlike style, using vibrant, non-naturalistic colors and simplified forms to explore existential questions about life, death, and the human condition. These paintings, steeped in symbolism and abstraction, reflect Gauguin's belief that art should transcend realism and directly engage with the complexities of the inner life. Through these bold experiments, Gauguin ultimately established a unique artistic identity that would leave a lasting legacy in the history of modern art. Gauguin's quest for artistic identity was a journey that involved constant self-exploration, a rejection of the mainstream art world, and a desire to represent a deeper, more spiritual connection to humanity. His work challenged traditional notions of representation and paved the way for the exploration of symbolism and abstraction in the 20th century, influencing later artists such as the Expressionists and Surrealists. Departure from France and the influence of Tahiti. Paul Gauguin's departure from France and his subsequent move to Tahiti in 1891 marked a crucial turning point in his life and artistic career. Disillusioned with French society and the limitations of European artistic traditions, Gauguin sought a place where he could escape the constraints of modern life and find the authenticity and simplicity he longed for. His relocation to Tahiti, an island in the South Pacific, was part of his search for an unspoiled, primitive environment that he believed would allow him to reconnect with deeper spiritual and emotional truths. This shift was not only geographical, but also marked a profound transformation in his artistic style, subject matter, and the way he engaged with his work. In France, Gauguin had already begun to experiment with symbolism, moving away from naturalism and impressionism in favor of bolder colors, simplified forms, and emotional intensity. However, his dissatisfaction with European modernity led him to believe that the true expression of human experience lay outside of the industrialized, urbanized West. Tahiti represented for Gauguin a place where he could escape the corrupting influence of Western civilization and reconnect with what he viewed as a more authentic, untouched way of life. Upon his arrival, he was captivated by the island's natural beauty, its people, and its rich cultural traditions, all of which profoundly influenced his work. Tahiti became the subject of many of Gauguin's most iconic paintings, where he explored themes of spiritualism, sensuality, and the human condition. His Tahitian works, such as Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? 1897, are deeply symbolic, using vibrant, non-naturalistic colors and abstracted forms to express complex existential questions. He rejected Western ideals of perspective and realism, instead using bold, flat colors to convey emotion and spirituality. The figures in his paintings are often simplified, sometimes appearing otherworldly, reflecting Gauguin's desire to evoke a sense of timelessness and universality. Moreover, Gauguin's depictions of Tahiti also reflect his fascination with primitivism, the idea that non-Western societies possessed a purity and authenticity that was lost in Europe's industrialized world. This interest in primitive art and culture became central to his work during his time on the island. He sought to represent not just the physical reality of the Tahitian people, but their emotional and spiritual essence, often distorting forms and using vivid colors to communicate a deeper connection to the natural world. In many ways, Gauguin's time in Tahiti allowed him to break free from the traditional constraints of European art and explore new ways of seeing and understanding the world. His works from this period had a profound impact on the development of modern art, influencing movements like Expressionism, Surrealism, and even later forms of abstraction. Through his exploration of the exotic, the spiritual, and the symbolic, Gauguin left an indelible mark on the evolution of modern art, forging a path toward new modes of artistic expression and a redefinition of what it meant to capture the essence of humanity. Symbolism and allegory in Gauguin's work. Paul Gauguin's work is deeply rooted in symbolism and allegory, reflecting his quest to transcend the surface of reality and delve into the emotional, spiritual, and psychological dimensions of human existence. As an artist, Gauguin was disillusioned with the naturalism and realism that dominated the art world of his time. He sought to create art that went beyond mere representation, using symbols and allegorical imagery to communicate deeper truths and universal themes. Gauguin's embrace of symbolism allowed him to explore not just the visible world, but the unseen, inviting viewers into a world of emotion, myth, and inner meaning. One of the most prominent features of Gauguin's work is his use of symbolism to express complex human experiences and existential questions. Rather than merely painting scenes from life, he infused his works with layers of symbolic meaning, often drawing from mythological, spiritual, and philosophical themes. For example, in his masterpiece, Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? 1897, Gauguin tackles profound questions about existence. The painting, depicting a group of Tahitian figures in various poses and states of life, uses symbolism to explore the cyclical nature of life, death, and the search for meaning. The figures in the painting, along with the symbolic use of color, represent different stages of existence, from birth to death, as well as the unknown beyond life. The work is an allegory for the human condition, confronting viewers with existential questions through visual imagery. Gauguin's symbolic approach also extended to his depictions of nature, where he often used the landscape and figures as metaphors for larger spiritual or emotional states. His use of bold, non-naturalistic colors and stylized forms was a deliberate attempt to evoke emotional responses rather than represent physical reality. By emphasizing the symbolic power of color and form, Gauguin sought to communicate an inner truth, one that transcended the limitations of conventional visual representation. In paintings like The Vision After the Sermon, 1888, Gauguin used the image of a vision to convey a spiritual message, employing vivid color contrasts and simplified shapes to heighten the emotional and symbolic resonance of the scene. In addition to symbolism, Gauguin's work often carried allegorical undertones, particularly in his portrayals of Tahitian life. While he was drawn to the idea of an idyllic, primitive paradise, his depictions of the island's people and culture were not simple representations, but rather allegories for deeper, often spiritual meanings. Gauguin viewed the Tahitian landscape and its inhabitants as a reflection of his own search for truth, and he used the island's imagery to express themes of innocence, spirituality, and human connection. Through his use of symbolism and allegory, Gauguin transformed his work into a vehicle for exploring complex and universal themes. His paintings invite viewers to contemplate not only the visible world, but the hidden meanings and emotions that lie beneath it. By departing from the literal and embracing the symbolic, Gauguin created works that continue to resonate with audiences today, offering timeless reflections on the human experience. Key paintings: Vision After the Sermon, Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? Two of Paul Gauguin's most significant works, Vision After the Sermon, 1888, and Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? 1897, offer a profound insight into the evolution of his style and his ongoing exploration of spirituality, symbolism, and human existence. Both paintings are rich in symbolic meaning and reflect Gauguin's desire to move beyond the conventions of Impressionism to create art that conveyed deeper emotional and philosophical truths. Vision After the Sermon, is one of Gauguin's most iconic works from his time in Pont-Aven, France, where he began developing his distinctive style. The painting depicts a scene of religious contemplation, where the figures of the faithful, having just heard a sermon, experience a vision of the biblical story of Jacob wrestling with an angel. What is striking about the painting is not just its subject matter, but the way Gauguin approached it. The background of the painting is a bold red color, representing a break from traditional perspective and naturalism. The figures are simplified and stylized, their forms flat and almost abstract, while the vision of Jacob and the angel is rendered in an almost dreamlike way, floating above the scene. This vivid use of color and abstraction reflects Gauguin's desire to evoke emotion and spirituality rather than simply depict a scene from reality. The work is a clear example of Gauguin's symbolic approach, as he used the biblical narrative as an allegory for the inner vision or spiritual experience, one that transcends the physical world. In contrast, Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? 1897, painted during his time in Tahiti, is one of Gauguin's most ambitious and deeply personal works. The painting is a meditation on the existential questions of life, death, and the unknown. It depicts a series of Tahitian figures in a lush, tropical landscape, with each figure representing different stages of life, from infancy to old age. The central figures, framed by the lush, symbolic backdrop, are arranged in a way that suggests the cyclical nature of life. The work is infused with a sense of mystery, as Gauguin uses bold color choices and exaggerated forms to create a dreamlike, allegorical scene. Rather than aiming for naturalism, the painting explores the questions that preoccupied Gauguin in his later years: the origins of existence, the meaning of life, and the inevitability of death. The vivid colors, especially the use of bright blue, green, and yellow, add to the surreal and symbolic quality of the piece, reinforcing the theme of an otherworldly or spiritual journey. Both paintings, though stylistically different, share common themes of spirituality, existential inquiry, and a deep connection to the symbolic use of color. Through Vision After the Sermon and Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? Gauguin pushed the boundaries of traditional painting, seeking to convey not just the external world, but the inner world of emotion, thought, and human experience. These works stand as testament to his enduring quest for meaning and his profound impact on the trajectory of modern art. Gauguin's influence on modern art and primitivism. Paul Gauguin's impact on modern art and the development of primitivism is profound, as his radical departure from Western artistic traditions helped shape the course of 20th century art movements. Through his exploration of non-Western cultures, his symbolic approach to color and form, and his rejection of naturalism, Gauguin influenced not only his contemporaries, but also future generations of artists. His fascination with what he perceived as the purity of primitive cultures played a pivotal role in the emergence of primitivism in art, a movement that sought to break from the constraints of European academic traditions and instead looked to non-Western art forms for inspiration. Gauguin's interest in primitivism was born out of his dissatisfaction with modern, industrialized society, which he believed had corrupted humanity and art. He found what he considered to be a more authentic, untainted way of life in the cultures of Tahiti, where he sought to reconnect with the spiritual and emotional essence of human existence. His time in Tahiti and his representations of the island's people had a significant influence on the primitivist movement, which sought to embrace simplicity, raw emotion, and an escape from the rationalism of European art traditions. Artists like Picasso, Matisse, and Derain were inspired by Gauguin's bold use of color, simplification of forms, and use of non-Western influences in their own explorations of abstraction and expressive art. Gauguin's approach to color and form was revolutionary. He deliberately used vibrant, exaggerated colors that defied naturalistic representation, focusing instead on the emotional and symbolic power of color. His works like The Yellow Christ and Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? showcased his use of flat color and simplified, stylized figures, creating a visual language that was not about mimicking the world, but about evoking a deeper truth. This departure from realism influenced later movements such as Fauvism and Expressionism, which prioritized emotional expression over accurate representation. Moreover, Gauguin's focus on spirituality, existential themes, and his symbolic depictions of life and death resonated with the later surrealists, who sought to delve into the subconscious and the world of dreams. His work opened the door for artists to explore the inner workings of the human psyche, as well as to challenge societal norms and explore new, uncharted artistic territories. In sum, Gauguin's artistic exploration of primitivism and his symbolic approach to painting left a lasting legacy on modern art. By rejecting the traditional academic art standards of his time, Gauguin redefined the role of the artist and the purpose of art itself, influencing a wide range of movements that would go on to reshape the art world in the 20th century. Chapter 7, Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, The Art of Modern Life. Henri Toulouse-Lautrec was one of the most influential artists of the late 19th century, known for his unique ability to capture the essence of modern life in Paris during the Belle Époque. His work reflected a deep understanding of the vibrant, sometimes gritty culture of the city, especially the nightlife and entertainment scene. Lautrec's art provided a lens into the world of cabarets, theaters, and cafes, where he portrayed the artists, performers, and everyday people who populated the modern urban landscape. His contributions to Post-Impressionism and the evolution of modern art are significant, not only for his distinctive style, but also for his ability to depict contemporary subjects with both sensitivity and sharpness. Lautrec's style was defined by his keen observation, his use of bold lines, and a remarkable ability to convey the character of his subjects through simplified forms. Drawing on the influences of Impressionism, he focused on capturing the fleeting nature of movement and expression, but his work was less concerned with light and color, and more focused on human figures and the emotional impact of his subjects. His distinctive approach to portraiture allowed him to convey the personalities of his subjects with remarkable depth. Whether in his posters of Parisian cabaret dancers or intimate depictions of the prostitutes, dancers, and entertainers he frequented. As a fixture in the Montmartre district, Lautrec's work was directly tied to the world of the Parisian avant-garde. His iconic posters for the Moulin Rouge, such as La Goulou at the Moulin Rouge, 1891, were revolutionary for their time, blending art with advertising in a way that was previously unseen. These posters utilized strong lines, flat color, and a sense of movement to draw attention to the performers, bringing the energy of the cabaret directly into the viewer's space. Lautrec's skill in capturing both the glamorous and seedy sides of modern life in Paris made him a master of documenting the cultural zeitgeist of his time. Lautrec's personal life was marked by physical challenges, as he was born with a congenital disorder that stunted the growth of his legs. This condition led to a certain sense of alienation, which is often reflected in his work, especially his depictions of marginalized figures in Parisian society. His sensitivity to their lives and struggles is what makes his art resonate with a sense of empathy and realism. Despite his relatively short life, Toulouse-Lautrec's ability to capture the vitality and complexity of modern life remains unparalleled, and his contributions to both modernist and commercial art continue to influence artists today. Toulouse-Lautrec's impact on Post-Impressionist art. Henri Toulouse-Lautrec's impact on Post-Impressionist art is profound and enduring, as his innovative approach to capturing modern life and his ability to merge commercial and fine art made him a pivotal figure in the late 19th century. Lautrec's work broke from the conventions of traditional academic painting, aligning more closely with the experimental spirit of the Post-Impressionist movement. His distinctive style, characterized by bold lines, dynamic compositions, and vivid colors, not only challenged the norms of portraiture and narrative painting, but also influenced the development of graphic design, printmaking, and the visual language of modern advertising. One of the most significant contributions Toulouse-Lautrec made to Post-Impressionism was his ability to portray the human figure with a unique blend of psychological insight and emotional depth. His subjects, often marginalized individuals from the Parisian nightlife scene, dancers, prostitutes, and entertainers, were painted with a sense of intimacy and sensitivity that set his work apart from many of his contemporaries. His keen understanding of human expression and body language allowed him to capture his subjects in a way that conveyed their inner lives, moving beyond superficial depictions. This emotional resonance in his portraits and scenes of daily life aligns him with other post-impressionists like Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin, who were also concerned with expressing personal emotional truths through art. Lautrec's use of color and composition also marked a departure from traditional techniques, particularly his reliance on bold, flat colors and strong outlines, which he borrowed from Japanese woodblock prints and lithographic posters. His graphic work, particularly his iconic posters for the Moulin Rouge and other cabarets, revolutionized the commercial art world. These works, with their simplified forms and striking color contrasts, elevated the status of advertising art and brought the vitality of the Parisian entertainment world into the public's consciousness. This fusion of fine art with commercialism created a new genre that blurred the lines between high and low art, an influence that would be seen later in the works of modern artists like Andy Warhol. In terms of artistic legacy, Toulouse-Lautrec's impact on Post-Impressionism is most clearly seen in his role as a bridge between the fluidity of Impressionism and the symbolic, often abstract tendencies of early modern art. His focus on the fleeting moments of modern life and his ability to convey emotion through simplified, yet highly expressive, forms helped pave the way for the later developments of Fauvism, Expressionism, and even Surrealism. His distinctive combination of vivid color, bold lines, and psychological insight has continued to inspire generations of artists, and his legacy remains deeply embedded in the art world today. Capturing the urban environment, the cabaret and Moulin Rouge. Henri Toulouse-Lautrec's portrayal of the urban environment, particularly his iconic representations of the cabaret and Moulin Rouge, offers a vivid snapshot of the dynamic, often turbulent nightlife in late 19th century Paris. Through his keen eye for detail and his innovative artistic style, Lautrec became one of the most important chroniclers of the city's entertainment culture, capturing the essence of its people, places, and performances with both empathy and wit. His works provide an intimate and often provocative look into the world of Parisian entertainment, a world that was both glamorous and gritty, and a significant part of the urban landscape during the Belle Époque period. The Moulin Rouge, the famous cabaret in the Montmartre district, was at the heart of Lautrec's artistic focus. The establishment, known for its vibrant shows and lively atmosphere, attracted a diverse range of performers, artists, and socialites, all of whom were captured in Lautrec's bold, dynamic paintings and lithographs. Lautrec's work reflected the energy and spectacle of the cabaret, where dancers, musicians, and performers pushed the boundaries of entertainment. In paintings such as La Goulou at the Moulin Rouge, 1891, Lautrec depicted the popular can-can dancer La Goulou, immortalizing her in a moment of high energy and abandon. The dancer's lively, exaggerated pose, coupled with Lautrec's use of flat color and strong outlines, emphasized the vitality of the performance, while also hinting at the ephemeral nature of the spectacle itself. Lautrec's ability to capture the urban environment of the cabaret and the Moulin Rouge was not limited to just its performances. He also portrayed the behind-the-scenes moments and the people who populated this world. His work went beyond glamour, giving attention to the less glamorous aspects of Parisian nightlife. Through portraits of dancers, musicians, and the patrons who frequented these establishments, Lautrec revealed the complexity and contradictions of the entertainment world. He often depicted performers in private moments, highlighting their human vulnerabilities alongside their stage personas, thus adding a layer of psychological depth to his representations. Moreover, Lautrec's use of posters and lithographs helped to blur the line between fine art and commercial advertisement, capturing the popular culture of the time in ways that were both visually striking and accessible to a broad public. His posters for the Moulin Rouge, such as Jane Avril, 1893, brought the cabaret's vibrant world to life, making these artistic depictions integral to the urban fabric of Paris. In this way, Lautrec's work played a crucial role in shaping the visual culture of the time, immortalizing the essence of Parisian entertainment and urban life. Ultimately, Toulouse-Lautrec's art is a powerful reflection of the modern urban experience. Through his depictions of the cabaret and Moulin Rouge, he captured the intersection of performance, identity, and culture in Paris, providing an enduring record of the city's lively, multifaceted social scene. His ability to blend both the glamorous and the gritty aspects of this world makes his work a timeless exploration of the complexities of modern urban life. Bold use of line and color. Henri Toulouse-Lautrec's distinctive style is largely defined by his bold use of line and color, which set him apart from his contemporaries and cemented his status as a revolutionary figure in the art world. His unique approach to both of these elements not only reflected his ability to capture the energy of modern life, but also underscored his desire to push the boundaries of artistic expression. Lautrec's mastery of line and color can be seen in his posters, paintings, and lithographs, where he used these tools to convey movement, emotion, and the vibrancy of the world around him. Lautrec's use of line was particularly influential in his depictions of the human figure. He often employed strong, sweeping outlines that emphasized the contours and energy of his subjects. This boldness in line created a sense of immediacy and fluidity, allowing him to capture the essence of his subjects in a few dynamic strokes. His ability to distill the figure into a series of fluid lines and shapes not only expressed motion, but also imbued his work with a sense of vitality that was integral to his depiction of Parisian nightlife. Whether in his iconic posters of dancers at the Moulin Rouge or his intimate portraits of performers, Lautrec's lines were more than just a structural element. They conveyed personality and emotional depth, capturing the spirit of his subjects in a way that transcended mere representation. Color, too, was a key component of Lautrec's innovative approach to art. He used color not just to imitate reality, but to enhance the emotional impact of his works. Lautrec's palette was often vivid and striking, with rich hues of reds, yellows, and blues, which he used to infuse his scenes with a sense of drama and intensity. In his posters, the use of flat, bold colors was a departure from the more subtle shading typical of academic painting, creating a more graphic, poster-like quality. This use of color, particularly in his lithographs, helped to blur the line between fine art and commercial advertising, bringing art directly into the public sphere. In works like At the Moulin Rouge, 1892 to 1895, Lautrec's bold use of color combined with his dramatic lines creates a sense of immediacy and energy that draws the viewer into the scene. The figures seem to pulse with life, their poses and expressions captured with a few strategic strokes. This dynamic approach to color and line was not just an aesthetic choice, but a way for Lautrec to convey the rapid pace and heightened emotions of the world he was depicting. His ability to convey the excitement, chaos, and sensuality of Parisian nightlife through such simple yet powerful means marks him as a true innovator of his time. In sum, Toulouse-Lautrec's bold use of line and color was essential to his artistic identity. It allowed him to express the modern world with a level of immediacy and energy that had not been seen before. By pushing the boundaries of these fundamental elements of art, he revolutionized how artists could depict movement, emotion, and modern life, leaving a lasting impact on both fine art and commercial visual culture. Lithographs and posters, the rise of graphic art. Henri Toulouse-Lautrec's contributions to the world of lithographs and posters marked a significant turning point in the evolution of graphic art, merging the worlds of fine art and commercial design in ways that had never been seen before. Lautrec's iconic lithographic posters, particularly those created for Parisian cabarets like the Moulin Rouge, helped redefine the boundaries of art, advertising, and popular culture. His innovative use of this medium not only elevated commercial design to the level of fine art, but also influenced the development of modern graphic art as we know it today. Lithography, a printing process that allowed for mass production of images, was relatively new at the time. Lautrec began experimenting with it. However, Lautrec immediately recognized its potential as a powerful tool for visual communication. Unlike traditional painting or drawing, lithography enabled the artist to create multiple copies of a single image, making art more accessible to the public and allowing it to be integrated into everyday life. Lautrec embraced this reproducibility, using it to reach a wide audience with his striking, colorful designs that were intended for public consumption, on walls, in cafes, on billboards, and in magazines. Lautrec's posters are characterized by their bold use of color, dynamic compositions, and simplified forms, elements that he carried over from his painting style. In works such as La Goulou at the Moulin Rouge, 1891, and Jane Avril, 1893, he used strong lines, flat colors, and a sense of motion to capture the lively energy of Parisian nightlife. His ability to distill the essence of his subjects into graphic yet expressive images made his posters not just advertisements, but dynamic works of art. Lautrec's images became an integral part of the cultural fabric of Paris, bringing the vibrant world of the cabaret into the public's consciousness. Beyond their commercial success, Lautrec's posters also had a lasting influence on the development of modern graphic design. His pioneering work in lithography helped elevate the poster as an art form in its own right, laying the groundwork for the use of bold graphics in advertising and commercial art. His dynamic compositions, use of negative space, and ability to convey personality through minimalistic forms became a standard that would influence future artists and designers, including the likes of Alphonse Mucha, A.M. Cassandre, and even contemporary designers today. Ultimately, Toulouse-Lautrec's lithographs and posters helped establish the power of graphic art as a form of expression. By blurring the lines between art and commerce, he redefined the role of the artist in modern society and demonstrated how art could reflect, influence, and interact with popular culture. His work remains a benchmark in the history of graphic design, illustrating the ways in which commercial and artistic endeavors can coexist and even enhance each other. Analysis of major works. At the Moulin Rouge, La Toilette. Henri Toulouse-Lautrec's works, At the Moulin Rouge and La Toilette, are both exemplary pieces that highlight his unique ability to capture the dynamic world of Parisian nightlife and the intimate moments of his subjects. These paintings offer deep insight into his distinctive style and the way he navigated between the public spectacle and private lives of his figures. Both works reflect his mastery in portraying movement, emotion, and the complexity of modern urban life during the Belle Époque period. At the Moulin Rouge, 1892 to 1895, is one of Lautrec's most famous pieces, showcasing his ability to encapsulate the energy and excitement of Parisian nightlife. The painting features a variety of characters, including dancers, patrons, and performers, all set within the intimate space of the Moulin Rouge cabaret. The composition is dynamic, with a sharp contrast of figures against dark, shadowy backgrounds, emphasizing the focus on the lively individuals within the crowd. Lautrec's use of unusual perspectives and the inclusion of both the audience and the performers creates a sense of immediacy and immersion. The figures are depicted in bold, expressive strokes, using strong outlines and vivid colors, which convey their physicality and emotional intensity. The feeling of movement is heightened by the posture and expressions of the dancers, as well as Lautrec's loose brushwork. The painting not only captures a moment in the vibrant world of entertainment, but also subtly evokes the complexity and occasional loneliness of these performers, a theme present in many of Lautrec's works. In La Toilette, 1896, Lautrec moves away from the bustling social atmosphere of the Moulin Rouge to a more personal and intimate moment. The painting features a woman preparing herself in the privacy of her room, a scene of quiet reflection and vulnerability. Unlike the energetic crowd scenes of the cabaret, La Toilette focuses on the subtleties of private life and the act of self-care. Lautrec's use of color in this work is softer compared to his vibrant depictions of public life. The palette consists of muted tones, which underscore the intimate nature of the scene. The loose, almost sketch-like brushstrokes capture the figure in a moment of motion, highlighting the tactile sensation of the moment as the woman adjusts her hair or clothes. The psychological depth of the figure is conveyed through Lautrec's ability to capture the quiet contemplation and isolation in the seemingly mundane task of preparing for the day. Both works showcase Lautrec's skill in rendering the human figure with psychological depth and expressive qualities, whether in the frenetic energy of At the Moulin Rouge or the solitude in La Toilette. His ability to merge dynamic composition, emotional insight, and innovative use of color and line defines his legacy as an artist who could simultaneously portray the vibrancy of public life and the quiet moments of private existence. Through these works, Toulouse-Lautrec not only documented the world around him, but also created evocative narratives that continue to resonate with viewers today. Chapter 8: The Diversity of Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism as a movement is often regarded as a diverse and multifaceted reaction to the limitations of Impressionism. While both movements shared a rejection of traditional academic techniques and an emphasis on color and light, Post-Impressionism diverged by introducing a broader range of stylistic approaches and philosophical underpinnings. The term itself was coined by the art critic Roger Fry in 1910, capturing the expansive variety of styles and ideologies that emerged in the aftermath of Impressionism. Post-Impressionism was not a cohesive style, but rather an umbrella term for several artists who sought to go beyond Impressionist techniques and experiment with their own expressions, marking a crucial turning point in the history of modern art. One of the defining features of Post-Impressionism was its rejection of the fleeting, momentary impressions that were central to Impressionism. While Impressionist painters like Claude Monet aimed to capture the effects of light and atmosphere at a specific moment, Post-Impressionists were more focused on representing their own emotional responses, subjective perspectives, and the symbolic or psychological dimensions of their subjects. For example, Vincent van Gogh used bold, expressive brushwork and a vivid palette to convey his emotional turmoil and personal vision of the world. In contrast, Paul Cézanne sought to introduce structure and form to the spontaneous brushwork of Impressionism, using geometry to organize his landscapes and still lifes. Georges Seurat, another leading post-impressionist, took a scientific approach to color and technique. His development of the technique of pointillism, or divisionism, was grounded in his study of color theory and optics. Seurat's paintings, such as A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, use small dots of pure color that, when viewed from a distance, visually blended together to form cohesive images. This method was a significant departure from the spontaneous brushwork of both Impressionism and earlier academic traditions. Paul Gauguin, meanwhile, explored the emotional and symbolic use of color, drawing upon his travels to Tahiti to create works that evoke the primitivist idea of a more innocent, unspoiled world. His use of color was often non-naturalistic, as seen in works like Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going?, where he used bold, exaggerated hues to enhance the narrative and psychological weight of the scene. While these artists, Van Gogh, Cézanne, Seurat, and Gauguin, represented different facets of Post-Impressionism, they all shared an interest in moving beyond the optical realism of Impressionism to explore new ways of representing both the external world and the internal world of the artist. The diversity within the movement was not only a response to the limitations of previous artistic traditions, but also a significant step toward the abstraction and experimentation that would dominate much of 20th century art. The Post-Impressionists' contributions would set the stage for the development of movements like Fauvism, Cubism, and Expressionism, continuing to challenge conventions and shape the future of modern art. The range of styles and approaches within Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism is often characterized by its diversity, as it encompasses a wide range of styles and approaches that emerged in response to the limitations of Impressionism. While the Impressionists focused on capturing the fleeting effects of light and atmosphere through direct observation, the Post-Impressionists sought to explore deeper emotional, psychological, and symbolic meanings in their work. As a result, this movement became a fertile ground for experimentation and innovation, with artists employing a variety of techniques and philosophies to express their individual visions. One of the key figures in Post-Impressionism, Vincent van Gogh, embraced the expressive power of color and brushstroke. His works, such as The Starry Night and Sunflowers, were imbued with intense emotion, with swirling, energetic brushstrokes and vibrant, often exaggerated colors. Van Gogh's approach to color was symbolic and subjective, using it not merely to depict reality, but to express his inner emotional state. His swirling brushstrokes, seen in The Starry Night, evoke a sense of movement and intensity, reflecting the turbulence of his mind. Van Gogh's style was highly personal, a stark contrast to the more objective focus of the Impressionists. In contrast, Paul Cézanne, often regarded as the father of modern art, introduced a more structured and analytical approach to Post-Impressionism. Cézanne was interested in form and the geometric foundations of the natural world. His landscapes, still lifes, and portraits, such as Mont Sainte-Victoire and the Basket of Apples, often appear fragmented and built on the principles of geometry with the use of cubes, spheres, and cones. His focus on the underlying structure of objects, combined with a slow, deliberate brushwork, paved the way for the development of Cubism in the early 20th century. Georges Seurat, another major Post-Impressionist, developed the technique of pointillism, a method based on the scientific study of color and optics. In works like A Sunday Afternoon on the island of Le Grand Jatte, Seurat used small dots of pure color to build up an image. This technique, also known as divisionism, emphasized color theory and the optical blending of hues, where the eye would mix the colors at a distance rather than through physical pigment mixing. Seurat's approach was highly systematic and meticulous, in contrast to the more spontaneous brushwork of his peers. Paul Gauguin, known for his use of color and his departure from naturalism, sought to evoke deeper symbolic meanings in his work. His paintings, such as Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going?, often feature bold, non-naturalistic colors and symbolic allegorical subjects. Gauguin's exploration of spirituality, mythology, and the primitivist ideal led him to travel to Tahiti, where he created some of his most renowned works, using color to convey emotional and symbolic depth. Together, these artists and their varying approaches demonstrate the broad range of styles within Post-Impressionism. While they each explore different methods and concerns, whether color, form, structure, or symbolism, they all rejected the limitations of Impressionism, paving the way for modern artistic movements like Expressionism, Fauvism, and Cubism. The diversity of Post-Impressionism reflects the growing individualism in art during the late 19th and early 20th centuries and marks a pivotal shift towards abstraction and subjective expression in the history of Western art. From naturalism to abstraction. One of the most significant shifts in the history of modern art was the transition from naturalism to abstraction, a movement that became increasingly prominent during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Naturalism, which had dominated Western art for centuries, focused on representing the world as accurately as possible, emphasizing realism and the faithful depiction of nature. However, as artists began to explore new ways of seeing and interpreting the world, they gradually moved away from this highly detailed, objective portrayal of reality, seeking more personal, emotional, and conceptual expressions. Post-Impressionism played a crucial role in this shift, particularly through the work of artists like Paul Cézanne, Vincent van Gogh, Georges Seurat, and Paul Gauguin. While they all drew on elements of Impressionism, they sought to move beyond the fleeting effects of light and color, which had defined the earlier movement. Their work was marked by a more individualistic approach, one that often involved manipulating form, color, and brushstroke to reflect inner experiences, emotional states, or symbolic meanings. This shift set the stage for the eventual movement toward abstraction. Cézanne's work, for example, marked a clear departure from naturalism as he sought to break down the natural world into geometric forms. His famous landscapes, like those of Mont Sainte-Victoire, demonstrate his focus on structure and the underlying geometry of nature. Rather than merely imitating what he saw, Cézanne analyzed and redefined it, using color and form to represent the essence of his subjects. This abstraction of form paved the way for later developments in modern art, particularly Cubism, which would take Cézanne's ideas to their logical conclusion. Vincent van Gogh's work, though still figurative, similarly distanced itself from naturalism by using expressive color and exaggerated brushwork to communicate emotion rather than accuracy. His thick, impassioned brushstrokes and vivid color palette were a departure from the realistic portrayal of nature, emphasizing an emotional rather than objective response to the world around him. This emotional intensity set the stage for the expressionist movements that followed. Georges Seurat's pointillism, with its meticulous use of small dots of color, was another break from traditional realism. By focusing on color theory and optical mixing, Seurat abstracted his subjects, allowing for a more scientific approach to color, while still creating highly detailed, almost abstract patterns within his compositions. Paul Gauguin took abstraction in a different direction, using bold, non-naturalistic colors and symbolic subject matter. His departure from realism was not just a visual one, but also a philosophical one, as he sought to convey deeper meanings through color and form, reflecting an emotional or spiritual connection to his subjects. The transition from naturalism to abstraction within Post-Impressionism laid the groundwork for the avant-garde movements that followed, such as Fauvism, Cubism, and eventually abstract art. These artists desire to move beyond representation and engage with the emotional, symbolic, and conceptual aspects of art represented a fundamental shift in the trajectory of modern art, one that continues to influence artists today. The role of symbolism, realism, and early abstraction. The late 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed a profound transformation in the visual arts, as artists sought to break away from the strictures of academic traditions and explore new ways of representing reality. Within this period, the interplay between symbolism, realism, and the early stages of abstraction played a pivotal role in shaping the trajectory of modern art. These movements not only reflected the changing cultural and intellectual climate of the time, but also laid the groundwork for the avant-garde experiments that would dominate the early 20th century. Realism, which emerged in the mid-19th century as a reaction against Romanticism and Neoclassicism, focused on portraying everyday life and ordinary people with unflinching accuracy. Artists like Gustave Courbet emphasized scenes from the working class, rural life, and the harsh realities of existence, rejecting idealized representations of beauty in favor of confronting the truth of contemporary life. This focus on the mundane and the real, while groundbreaking at the time, eventually led to the realization that the mere representation of the visible world was not enough to express the complexity of human experience. In contrast, symbolism, which developed towards the end of the 19th century, sought to convey deeper, often mystical or emotional truths through symbolic imagery. Artists like Paul Gauguin, Odilon Rennes, and Gustave Moreau used allegorical and mythological subjects to move beyond the literal world and explore inner states, spirituality, and the subconscious. Rather than depicting reality as it was, symbolism emphasized the subjective, the dreamlike, and the mysterious, encouraging the viewer to look beyond surface appearances. Gauguin's use of vivid, non-naturalistic colors and his departure from representational accuracy in works like Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? Exemplify the symbolist pursuit of emotional and spiritual depth. As these artistic currents began to converge, the seeds of early abstraction were sown. Artists like Vincent van Gogh and Georges Seurat, while still grounded in figuration, began to move away from the direct representation of nature. Van Gogh's expressive use of color and brushstroke, for example, was less concerned with faithfully capturing the external world than with conveying the emotional intensity of his inner experience. His swirling, impassioned brushstrokes in works like The Starry Night demonstrate a shift away from realism towards a more subjective and symbolic expression of reality. Similarly, Seurat's pointillism, which sought to break down color into distinct dots and build up an image from the optical blending of color, marked a significant departure from traditional realism. His work, while still representational, began to explore the relationship between perception, color theory, and visual abstraction, suggesting a new approach to how the world could be depicted. Together, these movements, realism, symbolism, and the early steps toward abstraction, illustrated a broadening of the possibilities for artistic expression. They challenged the limitations of representation and ushered in a new era of modern art, where artists increasingly sought to express not just the external world, but the inner world of emotion, perception, and imagination. This shift would eventually pave the way for the fully abstract art that emerged in the 20th century, fundamentally changing the course of art history. The individual artistic vision versus the collective movement. The tension between individual artistic vision and collective artistic movements has been a central theme throughout the history of art, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. During this period, the rise of modernism saw the flourishing of various art movements that both encouraged individual expression and, at times, adhered to collective ideals. Post-Impressionism, a movement that emerged as a response to Impressionism, exemplifies this dynamic, as artists sought to forge their own unique paths while also participating in broader shifts in the art world. In many ways, Post-Impressionism was a celebration of the individual artist's vision. Unlike the Impressionists, who emphasized the transient effects of light and atmosphere, Post-Impressionists were concerned with more personal and subjective expressions. Artists like Vincent van Gogh, Paul Cézanne, and Paul Gauguin each developed highly individual styles that set them apart from one another and from the Impressionist group. Van Gogh's use of bold, swirling brushstrokes and intense symbolic color reflected his inner emotional world, while Cézanne's analytical approach to form and structure in his landscapes and still lifes laid the foundation for modern abstraction. Gauguin, with his mystical use of color and departure from naturalism, sought to explore deeper spiritual and psychological realms in his work. These artists were not concerned with creating a unified movement, but instead they embraced their individuality, each pursuing a distinct vision of the world. At the same time, however, the post-impressionist artists were part of a larger shift in the art world that was collectively rejecting the academic conventions of earlier periods. Their rejection of traditional representation, the move towards more expressive and symbolic art, and their engagement with new ways of depicting reality were part of the broader modernist project. While each artist's vision was personal, it was also shaped by and contributed to the larger evolution of art. The collective movement in this sense was not about a single style or ideology, but rather a shared commitment to breaking away from established norms and exploring new modes of artistic expression. This interplay between the individual and the collective is evident in the way these artists influenced one another, often participating in exhibitions together and drawing inspiration from each other's innovations. Seurat's development of pointillism, for example, was influenced by the scientific advancements of the time, but also reflected his unique approach to color theory and visual perception. Similarly, Cézanne's emphasis on structure and form influenced the Cubists, particularly Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, despite his departure from the collective nature of any formal movement. Ultimately, the relationship between individual vision and collective movement in Post-Impressionism reflects the larger transformation in the art world during the Modernist period. Artists embraced their personal styles while simultaneously engaging with the wider cultural and artistic shifts of the time. This balance between personal expression and collective change helped to shape the future of art, fostering a diverse range of styles and ideas that would continue to evolve throughout the 20th century. Chapter 9: Post-Impressionism and its Legacy. Post-Impressionism, while a distinct movement in itself, played a crucial role in shaping the trajectory of modern art. Emerging in the late 19th century as a response to the Impressionist focus on capturing fleeting moments of light and color, Post-Impressionism moved toward a more personal and expressive vision. This shift was driven by a desire to go beyond mere representation, to delve into the inner emotional states, spiritual meanings, and structural foundations of the world. The legacy of Post-Impressionism is vast, as it not only influenced the direction of art in the years that followed, but also laid the groundwork for the revolutionary movements that defined the 20th century. The Post-Impressionist approach emphasized individuality and innovation. Artists like Paul Cézanne, Vincent van Gogh, Georges Seurat, and Paul Gauguin broke away from the representational realism that dominated earlier periods, each developing their unique methods and perspectives. Cézanne's exploration of form and structure paved the way for the rise of Cubism, with his analytical treatment of space influencing artists like Picasso and Braque. Van Gogh's emotionally charged use of color and expressive brushwork set the stage for the later development of Expressionism, inspiring artists who sought to convey deep emotional and psychological states through their work. Seurat's pointillism and systematic approach to color theory left an indelible mark on later avant-garde movements, influencing the development of both abstraction and futurism. Gauguin's symbolic approach to color and his exploration of spirituality and primitivism contributed to the rise of symbolism and fauvism, movements that valued emotional expression over representational accuracy. The legacy of Post-Impressionism can also be seen in the evolution of modern art's relationship with abstraction. The departure from naturalistic representation in favor of more subjective and symbolic content laid the foundation for abstraction in the early 20th century. Artists like Wassily Kandinsky and Kazimir Malevich took the emphasis on form, color, and emotional expression even further, eventually leading to pure abstraction in their work. Moreover, Post-Impressionism's exploration of subjective reality and individual vision echoed throughout the development of modernist thought in other disciplines, such as literature, philosophy, and psychology. The movement's emphasis on the subjective nature of experience and the rejection of a single, unified view of reality mirrored the shifts in intellectual and cultural life during this period. The legacy of Post-Impressionism is felt not only in the development of subsequent art movements, but also in the continued embrace of individuality, experimentation, and emotional depth in art. The boldness with which Post-Impressionist artists challenged conventions and pursued personal expression inspired future generations of artists to explore new possibilities in both technique and subject matter. Through their work, they established the foundation for the explosion of artistic innovation that would characterize the 20th century, making Post-Impressionism an indispensable chapter in the history of art. Influence on 20th century art movements: Cubism, Fauvism, Expressionism. Post-Impressionism, with its departure from traditional representation and its focus on individual expression, played a pivotal role in shaping the major art movements of the 20th century, including Cubism, Fauvism, and Expressionism. These movements, though distinct in their approaches, all owe a debt to the innovations pioneered by post-impressionist artists who sought to move beyond naturalism and explore new ways of seeing and representing the world. Cubism, one of the most influential art movements of the early 20th century, was profoundly shaped by the work of Paul Cézanne. His approach to breaking down forms into geometric shapes and his interest in capturing the underlying structure of objects provided the groundwork for the Cubists, particularly Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. Cézanne's emphasis on the geometry of nature and his use of color to suggest volume and depth directly inspired the Cubist deconstruction of the human form and objects into fragmented, abstracted planes. Cubism went even further than Cézanne, completely abandoning perspective and representation in favor of depicting multiple viewpoints simultaneously, but its roots in Post-Impressionism are unmistakable. Fauvism, led by artists such as Henri Matisse and André Derain, was also influenced by the emotional intensity of Post-Impressionism, particularly the work of Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin. Van Gogh's use of bold, non-naturalistic color and expressive brushwork resonated with the Fauve, who similarly prioritized emotional expression over representational accuracy. The Fauve adopted vibrant, unnatural color schemes and strong brushstrokes, using color not to mimic reality, but to convey feeling and atmosphere. This marked a radical departure from the muted tones of earlier academic painting, and Post-Impressionism's emphasis on color as an emotional tool became a key foundation for Fauvism. Expressionism, which emerged in the early 20th century in Germany, was heavily influenced by both the symbolic and emotional aspects of Post-Impressionism. Artists like Edvard Munch and Ernst Ludwig Kirchner drew inspiration from the vivid, emotional color palette and the distorted, exaggerated forms seen in Van Gogh's work. Expressionism sought to convey inner emotional and psychological states through distorted and abstracted imagery, a pursuit that was foreshadowed in the work of post-impressionists like Van Gogh, who used color and brushwork to evoke personal and emotional responses to his subjects. The symbolic content of Gauguin's work also found echoes in Expressionism, with its focus on spirituality, mysticism, and the exploration of the subconscious. In essence, the break from realism and the exploration of new ways of perceiving and expressing the world that Post-Impressionism fostered created a fertile ground for the development of these revolutionary movements. By emphasizing individual expression, emotional resonance, and a departure from the literal depiction of reality, Post-Impressionism laid the intellectual and stylistic foundation for Cubism, Fauvism, and Expressionism, each of which would go on to redefine the course of modern art in the 20th century. The evolution of color and form in modern art. The evolution of color and form in modern art marks a radical departure from the rigid conventions of earlier periods. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, a seismic shift occurred in how artists approached both color and form, influenced by movements such as Post-Impressionism, Fauvism, and Cubism. These shifts not only transformed the visual language of art, but also aligned with broader philosophical and intellectual changes, reflecting an increasing emphasis on subjective experience, abstraction, and individual expression. In Post-Impressionism, artists like Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin revolutionized the use of color. Whereas the Impressionists sought to capture the natural light of the world through delicate tonal shifts, the Post-Impressionists embraced more vibrant, symbolic uses of color. Van Gogh, for instance, employed bold, expressive color to convey deep emotional truths, as seen in Starry Night, where the swirling blues and yellows of the night sky evoke a sense of inner turmoil and wonder. Similarly, Gauguin's non-naturalistic color choices in his Tahitian landscapes and figure studies were intended not to mirror reality, but to express spiritual and psychological states. Color became a tool of emotional and symbolic resonance, rather than mere representation, setting the stage for later movements that would continue to experiment with its expressive potential. The departure from traditional color use was accompanied by a radical rethinking of form. Paul Cézanne's work, particularly in his landscapes and still lifes, marked a critical evolution in the treatment of form. His exploration of the geometry underlying natural objects, such as his famous depictions of Mont Sainte-Victoire, suggested that form could be broken down into simple shapes: cylinders, spheres, and cones. This structural approach laid the groundwork for Cubism, where artists like Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque shattered objects into fragmented geometric forms, completely abandoning traditional perspective in favor of presenting multiple viewpoints simultaneously. The Cubists broke free from the constraints of linearity, allowing form to be dynamic, fragmented, and open to interpretation. The rise of abstraction, driven by these innovations, marked another leap in the evolution of color and form. As artists like Wassily Kandinsky and Kazimir Malevich moved further away from representational art, color and form began to take on a life of their own, no longer tied to the depiction of objects or the external world. Kandinsky, for example, used color to represent sound, emotion, and spirituality, divorcing it from any specific visual reference. Form, likewise, evolved from the representation of real-world objects to an exploration of pure shapes and lines that conveyed feeling and concept rather than description. Thus, the evolution of color and form in modern art was a journey of liberation. Artists moved away from realistic depictions of the world and began to explore the inner world of emotion, perception, and the abstract possibilities of visual language. This evolution marked a significant break from the past, allowing for the development of new artistic languages that continue to influence art today. Through the innovations of color and form, modern art redefined the possibilities of expression and established the foundation for the avant-garde movements of the 20th century. The continuing relevance of Post-Impressionism in contemporary art. The legacy of Post-Impressionism continues to resonate strongly in contemporary art, influencing both the techniques and conceptual frameworks of modern artists. Emerging as a reaction to Impressionism, Post-Impressionism was marked by its bold use of color, innovative approaches to form, and an emphasis on emotional and symbolic expression. These characteristics laid the groundwork for countless developments in 20th and 21st century art, making Post-Impressionism an enduring source of inspiration for contemporary artists who seek to explore new ways of representing reality and conveying emotion. One of the most enduring contributions of Post-Impressionism is the use of color as a tool for emotional expression. Artists like Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin employed vivid, non-naturalistic color palettes to communicate their inner experiences, setting a precedent for contemporary artists who use color in a similarly expressive way. Today, many artists continue to explore how color can convey feeling, whether through abstract compositions or vibrant depictions of the human condition. The emotional power of color, first revolutionized by Post-Impressionists, remains a cornerstone in the visual language of contemporary art, from the bold, saturated hues of abstract painting to the expressive use of color in street art and installations. In addition to color, Post-Impressionism's emphasis on subjective reality and personal interpretation paved the way for the conceptual and emotional freedom that defines much of contemporary art. The Post-Impressionists rejected objective representation in favor of exploring individual perceptions of the world, and this notion of subjective truth still drives contemporary art practice. From abstract art to performance and installation art, the freedom to depict the world through a personal lens allows artists to address a wide range of themes, from identity and politics to spirituality and human emotion. Contemporary art continues to challenge established norms and conventions, much as Post-Impressionism did in its time. seeking to break free from traditional forms of representation and explore more complex, multifaceted realities. Furthermore, the influence of Post-Impressionism is seen in the continued relevance of figures like Paul Cézanne, whose exploration of form and structure influenced the development of modern abstraction. Today, artists who work in both figurative and abstract realms draw inspiration from Cézanne's revolutionary use of geometry and perspective. Contemporary artists who seek to merge abstraction with representation, like those involved in the contemporary resurgence of figurative painting, continue to reference Cézanne's techniques and his dedication to representing the underlying structure of nature. Ultimately, Post-Impressionism's embrace of individual expression, its rejection of rigid academicism, and its willingness to explore color, form, and symbolism in new ways have ensured its lasting relevance in contemporary art. The movement's innovations continue to inspire artists today, providing a foundation for a wide range of artistic practices that explore the emotional, psychological, and conceptual dimensions of the human experience. The enduring legacy of Post-Impressionism is a testament to its role in reshaping the landscape of modern art and continuing to shape the direction of contemporary creativity. Post-Impressionism's role in the development of art criticism. Post-Impressionism played a significant role in the evolution of art criticism, shifting the focus of evaluation from strict technical mastery and realism to the exploration of individual expression, emotional depth, and conceptual meaning. Emerging in the late 19th century, Post-Impressionism broke from the conventions established by the academic tradition, which had long prioritized idealized depictions of the human form and historical scenes. As a result, the movement's impact on art criticism was transformative, encouraging critics to move beyond mere aesthetic evaluation and consider deeper, more subjective aspects of an artwork. One of the most profound effects of Post-Impressionism on art criticism was the push towards a more interpretive approach to art. The movement's emphasis on personal expression and emotion prompted critics to assess works based on how they conveyed the inner world of the artist, as well as their ability to evoke feelings in the viewer. Vincent van Gogh's emotionally charged use of color and expressive brushwork, for example, forced critics to look beyond conventional beauty and technical skill, instead focusing on the raw emotion that these elements communicated. The shift toward evaluating art in terms of emotional resonance rather than realism mirrored broader societal changes, as artists and critics began to recognize that the subjective experience could be as important, if not more so, than objective representation. The work of Post-Impressionist artists also sparked a reevaluation of the role of color and form in conveying meaning. Paul Cézanne's innovative use of form, breaking objects down into geometric shapes, challenged critics to think about art in terms of structure and abstraction, rather than strict adherence to naturalistic representation. This departure from traditional perspectives in art led to a broader understanding of what art could be, prompting critics to consider how new approaches to color, form, and texture could convey not just physical reality, but psychological and emotional truths. As critics began to appreciate the importance of abstraction and color theory, their analyses became more focused on the intellectual and conceptual aspects of art, aligning with the growing interest in modernism. Furthermore, Post-Impressionism influenced the rise of more specialized art criticism, particularly in terms of movements like symbolism, which emphasize spiritual or allegorical content. Critics became more attuned to the symbolic meanings behind an artist's choice of subject matter and style, recognizing that works like Gauguin's "Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?" convey deeper philosophical and existential themes. Post-Impressionism's embrace of subjective meaning and emotional expression prompted art critics to broaden their focus, leading to the development of a more diverse and analytical approach to art criticism that considered not only the aesthetic qualities of a work, but also its emotional, symbolic, and intellectual dimensions. Ultimately, Post-Impressionism's impact on art criticism laid the groundwork for the modern, multifaceted approach to evaluating art that we see today. By championing individuality, emotional depth, and subjective interpretation, Post-Impressionism helped shape the way critics and audiences engage with art, fostering an environment in which the exploration of meaning and personal expression continues to be valued just as highly as technical skill and representation. Chapter 10, Conclusion. Post-Impressionism was a transformative movement that not only reshaped the trajectory of modern art, but also played a crucial role in breaking free from the constraints of traditional representation. By embracing color, form, and emotional expression in new ways, post-impressionist artists like Vincent van Gogh, Paul Cézanne, Paul Gauguin, and Georges Seurat provided a foundation for the artistic revolutions that followed. Their collective desire to capture deeper psychological truths, subjective realities, and symbolic meanings over naturalistic depictions marked a dramatic departure from the established norms of the 19th century and signaled the beginning of a new era in the history of art. The contributions of Post-Impressionism reverberated across countless movements of the 20th century. The geometric forms of Cézanne's work laid the groundwork for the birth of Cubism, while Van Gogh's expressive brushstrokes and vibrant color palette directly influenced the emotional intensity of Expressionism and Fauvism. Seurat's pointillism, with its scientific approach to color and form, became a precursor to later abstract movements, and Gauguin's interest in symbolism and primitivism led to a deeper exploration of the spiritual and psychological aspects of art. At its core, Post-Impressionism was about the liberation of art from the confines of realism and the embracing of subjective experience. It was a call for artists to look inward, to explore the emotional and spiritual dimensions of the human condition, and to challenge the boundaries of traditional artistic practices. By pushing the limits of representation, these artists provided the creative freedom necessary for future movements to flourish. Moreover, the influence of Post-Impressionism extended beyond the canvas. The movement's radical approach to color, form, and symbolism contributed to the development of modern art criticism. Critics began to focus not just on the technical aspects of painting, but also on the emotional and intellectual content of a work. This shift in art criticism was crucial in fostering the diverse range of artistic practices that would characterize the 20th century. In conclusion, Post-Impressionism's legacy is one of profound transformation. It redefined how art was made, understood, and appreciated, shaping the course of modern art and continuing to inspire contemporary artists. Its commitment to individual expression, its reimagining of color and form, and its celebration of subjective reality remain central to the practice and study of art today. Through its revolutionary approach, Post-Impressionism forever altered the landscape of artistic creation and interpretation, leaving an indelible mark on the evolution of art.